Hello, everybody. This is Mariana Hutten speaking here on behalf of AES Toronto. I am the one of the execs here focused on membership here at AES Toronto, and I'm pleased to talk about audio for sports with amazing professionals of the audio field here in Toronto. And the idea that I had about this meeting was because I got to work in the Winter Olympics this year, and I thought it was really interesting. I learned a lot of new things as being somebody that works primarily in post for TV and music. To get to know this world that was a mystery for me, so I want you to be introduced to this world if you haven't already. With no further ado, I would like to introduce our presenters for the evening, and that is Roberto Capretta, Ross Citrullo, sorry if I mispronounced your name,
Close.
and Bob Miles. And first, let's start with from left to right on my screen here. Let's get started with Bob Miles. Can you give like a short summary of your experiences in audio and in specifically in sports? Yeah.
I started in this business before I was in television in film sound production and actually post production, and did that for several years, and then kind of fell into the TV world and fell in love with the live world. And if you're going to do live television, it has to be sports. It's so much of the other live productions dropped away. So it's something I loved right from the beginning, and different job every day. So followed sports, and I was very fortunate to start when TSN was just coming on air, and there was a new wave of freelancers and production companies out there. And it was very early days, and it was, as Roberto probably remembers, I mean, it was 4 microphones and mono and all that kind of stuff. But then, moved on to 5.1 in sports when TSN launched 5.1 for their live production, which was an interesting challenge. And moved on with Olympics, where we've gone from on Olympics, I've gone from mono to stereo to 5.1 to Atmos. And it's pretty much almost everything I've done, other than I had about an 8-year stint in management, which was 5 years working on the consortium, which was the Vancouver and London games for the domestic, and then stayed on agent court for a couple of years, and then been back freelancing ever since.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now we're going to move on with Ross. Ross has such a wide range of experience. He's amazing at every single kind of audio engineering he's done. So,
well, I appreciate
you introduce yourself. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ross Citrullo. So I'm here at my studio, RC Music. I started in audio in sort of in a very different way than I guess the other guys here, where mine was more music based when I started. It was about being a guitar player. I wanted to do rock and roll. That was my life. I was surrounded by guitars. But I got my career started actually doing post production at Sound Dogs Toronto, and again I kind of fell in love with the TV world, and that was sort of where I understood that was more of a bill payer and yada yada yada. But that was kind of how I broke into the audio world, and because obviously it's very difficult to break into music right off the bat. And then my career kind of worked with both ways, doing the music side of it, being a producer, specifically an engineer, and then also doing all of the post stuff for a lot of like short documentaries and TV episodes and all that stuff. And then I ended up working with the CFL, as was sort of my first gig out of university, and I did all these documentaries with a buddy of mine from there, where we did the referee documentaries. We looked at the specific players and the getting traded from here to there and their workout routines and all that stuff. And then that migrated into work with the NFL. So I was able to work with the Pagula Sports Entertainment down in Buffalo, doing essentially their documentaries for the NFL, and then into the NHL world with the Buffalo Sabres, and also worked with my favorite team, the Toronto Maple Leafs. So I was able to do some work there, and that's pretty much my experience in the sports world is doing the documentary side of that, and then applying that into the live venue playback.
Excellent, excellent. And you're the only person I know that won an Emmy and got nominated for Juno that I know that I know of. So can you give like a small description of what you got nominated for the Emmy?
Yeah, so the Emmy's right there. It was again, it was for through the NFL, so the NHL. So it was on the Buffalo Sabres and Toronto Maple Leafs, their rivalry in the late '90s, early 2000s with Ty Domi and Rob Ray. When they used to fight all the time, it was always like that pre-planned, or we're going to meet up, so it's going to be a scuffle kind of game. And basically, the documentary was covering their rivalry and sort of where they are now. I think it was shot in 2019, and so it was more about like how did they sort of pre-plan this, what were they thinking about earlier and in the day, and how they got together. And then the doc was kind of showing the highlight reels, so we were mixing game footage in with the interview stuff that we had shot, and then it was shown in the arena, it was shown in the NFL Network, so it required a mix for the arena and a mix for television broadcast. So it was kind of crazy to just sort of tie all these worlds together. But yeah, we ended up winning, which was awesome.
And lastly, but not least, Roberto Capretta, if you could introduce yourself and your story.
Hi, everybody. This is going to be actually interesting because I think that there's an interesting correlation between the other speakers today. We've kind of met before, and what's kind of odd is that very few people who are in the sports mixing world have also done post. Anyway, I fell into it by accident. It was never my intention to get into sports broadcasting. I'm a McGill grad. I was told by one of my professors, who was one of the mixers at the studio, that I'm not sure where music mixing is going. Learn about video post, and there was not much video post in the 80s. So I got a job at Channel 11 because I was from Hamilton, and Channel 11 had mobiles, and our contracts were with the Buffalo Sabres. My first summer, I did the '87 Canada Cup for CTV and Don Cherry show, and a show called In Session, which famously once had Stevie Ray Vaughan on it. And anyway, so a variety of different things. I thought this is a great way to learn about video, but I did a ton of sports that summer. I like sports, and basically had to learn how to connect it with from where I was from. And I also did post though, so I kind of did a lot of different hockey, figure skating, baseball, IndyCar stuff, and then I left to be the production designer on the sound designer on the Red Green show, and I did a bunch of stuff with Nelvana, etc. And then I ended up back at CBC, where I somehow ended up back in hockey, and I was for years the main hockey night mixer on Saturday night for the Leafs, Stanley Cup Finals, All-Star games, and I'm now lead on the Olympics. So anyway, so I'm kind of being back and forth. I've kind of done everything. I've done boom, RF, and I think all those little different things that you do help you in that job. I think that roundness makes you a better mixer.
Yeah, I mean, I find that most audio fields, most areas in audio, whether you're in music or whether you're in post, they're all kind of like translatable. You can bring some of the same skills and apply them differently, which actually brings me to our first question for the evening, which is, what are the similarities and differences in the field of audio for sports in comparison to music and film? Either of you can get started.
Well, the hockey game is going to start whether you're ready or not. There's a very finite deadline. Not saying there's not in other areas, but I think in sports it's I not to talk too much about it, but I always wear my watch, because to me it's always a countdown to the puck drop or the start of the broadcast. So if you're in at noon, it's just okay, I've got 7 hours, and there's certain time constraints I have through the day and where I want to be, and then there's a point where you start to panic. It's like, okay, I'm half an hour behind, because you just know that you do long if you know the routine. And I think that's unique to sports. Maybe a bit more in sound reinforcement for concerts, but even then, concerts, have you ever seen the band go on at 8?
No.
Exactly.
I'll say this again from a documentary perspective. I feel like in music and in film, the audio component is quite important, and that everyone knows that. In the world where we are, it's kind of like the audio is an afterthought, where it's like, okay, I'm the player, I'm going to perform, and I don't really care where you put this mic, I'm going to still hit this guy just as hard. There's no fragility, there's no, like, they don't care about any of that. So when it comes from the documentary side of it, maybe it's different, you know, when they're speaking on camera and they're on Hockey Night in Canada or whatever. But from my perspective, we're lucky to get any audio at all because these players are so harsh with their equipment and everything that they're not taking any precision with the gear. So I think in many ways that's different than the other fields where it's like, okay, clearly audio is important. Here they don't really care.
Yeah, I think I came from, when I was at McGill, I did orchestral, operas, classical, and some of that was at CH. We were doing things early in those days, but that kind of the business disappeared and it all just focused into sports eventually. But the very first time I put on a lav, and I thought, I'm used to Berlin Care 4066s or whatever, and these lavs sound terrible. And you're sitting there for the first time going, oh my God, like, what do I do? And then also the noise. But in the end, like years of doing sound effects editing, I use Sound Dog stuff, by the way. And some of the stuff is the same. Like when you're mixing a game, you have just a lot of noise, 20,000 people screaming, people banging on the glass and pucks, and you're trying to draw out, and you're trying to still focus your effects. And you have to find out how to kind of push everything together, mix everything together so that a part of your mix focuses out and the other doesn't. And that's like understanding your cue. And really that's no different than mixing an orchestra.
You know, Roberto, I don't tell a lot of people the story because a lot of people don't get it, but in name dropping, but when I was in sound effects editing, one of the features I worked on, Mike Hugaboom, I believe was his name, at Film House was our mixer. Yeah, the post-production mixer. And I spent a month, because we had edited for weeks and weeks and weeks, whatever, we went in and he was our final mix. And we would sit there and we would go through and listen to all the tracks, and he would send us back every night. Okay, I need this, I need this, I need this, you hear this. And the other editors was quite young like myself. And we learned so much from just working with him that the final, you know, where the final mix ended from where we came in with our first tracks was, like, it was all 35 millimeter mag stock. But you know, that's where I learned the layering and how important it was for him. And because in the final mix was, you know, there was the dialogue and there was, you know, it was just a stereo mix for theatrical. But, you know, he was so concerned about those layers and that each layer has a component. And I find with sports, I think it's the same thing. You know, you have your dialogue and then you have your ambience tracks and you have your effects tracks, and you're trying to build a soundscape live while it's going on. It's not just opening up a bunch of faders and sending gains.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? When it comes to, so like, again, I'm a huge hockey fan, so I'm always watching, you know, the game just in general. Are you, when you're mixing the audio for a game like that, are you walking the audience mics and the room mics between zones? You are actually riding them, is that right? So I guess when I see it as a final deliverable, as a stereo 2-track off the broadcaster, what I'm getting is your work being balanced across, right? And then I'm able to take that and hopefully it's consistent enough that it sounds like a wash, because it doesn't really feel like it's moving. Obviously it's not panning, right? So it doesn't feel like it's traveling across the screen, but it does feel like there is a difference as the zones change, right? You do feel that.
Well, for hockey, there's 10 or 12 PCCs. Like if you think PZM microphone, the Crown PCC is the standard. I think Bob would agree with that, but it never was a long time ago. It was done differently. But you know, there's a difference in how people mix it. Some people are like, they'll open up mic by mic, and that's kind of me. Some people go by zones. Neither system's wrong, right? Or, you know, everybody has a preference on how to do stuff. And for figure skating, right? Well, you know, you got that PA blaring down and you have those PCCs against the boards. It's very, very difficult. If you open up 7 or 8 microphones at the same time, you're not going to hear that skater land. And So you got to know where you are and you're basically following along. But the trick is that you're moving microphones and you're shifting stuff in and out. Well, you don't want to hear that.
You
So
should never hear the fader move. You
Yes.
should never hear the fader move.
Exactly.
That's the magic.
How does phase relate to all this then? Obviously, if you've got a zone that's the size of a football field versus
Exactly.
like a skating rink, how does the phase of these mics relate to that?
Very much. But it's, but you know, the bigger issue is if you run, what I find personally, if you run too many mics as a zone, you know, some guys have a tendency to do VCAs. Again, nothing's wrong. It's just how you set up your mix and all your dynamics on it. But, you know, they'll run 3 faders. So it's left, center, right on VCAs, and they'll have stuff sort of zoned across. And then other people will follow, like I normally just follow all the way through, follow the puck. I find you get a bit more phasing if you're doing the zones, because now you might have 3 mics that are open at the left end of the ice. And now the puck that hits the glass is being picked up by 3 mics. And it's kind of hard to run the VCA and run the individual mics to correct that. Now, maybe if somebody's got dynamics such, it's not that big of an issue. So it's very unique, I think, for every person, how they do it. Because I've gone into audio rooms during hockey games and I've watched, you know, look, people sitting, ooh, it's like, oh, I don't do it that way. But you listen to the game and you wouldn't know it. You know what I mean? It's just everybody's learned a different way.
Yeah. But some people, yeah, what Bob's example is dead on. Yeah, you'll notice that mixing. If you listen to a game carefully and you hear a puck and it hits a stick, but you hear like 3 or 4 different delays, right? Because one's 10 milliseconds, one's 15, 20 milliseconds, you know, because those pucks, those mics are usually on the blue lines, on the goal lines, behind the net. If you open up 4 or 5 mics, you're going to hear click. And but then someone who mixes, I think how Bob and I mix, you're going to hear a much more precision click. Right?
But
I think that's, yeah.
Don't go ahead, Roberto. You can finish.
No, you go ahead.
The bigger issue with doing that and trying to follow the puck is everything else that's going on in the room at the same time. That makes it very difficult because you need both hands. So as soon as somebody says, oh, can you make an adjustment, or you need to talk on the intercom, you've lost the ability to use that hand to mix. So it's it's tough because sometimes you have to qualify, well, do I answer a question or do I keep mixing? And you sort of have to judge as you're going along. So if you notice the mix gets bad, it's going really well for a while. And then all of a sudden there's like 10 seconds and it's like, I don't hear the puck as well anymore. Chances are the mixer's been doing something on the intercom or something on a keyboard over there or whatever. So when you get the big budget shows, you get a sub mixer to work for you. So, and it's just one fader.
Is there a math equation for how you would place the mics in terms of the pickup patterns or the range of that, where you can sort of say, well, this is a safe range to trade between faders?
There was a period of time where the PCCs kept on getting lower and lower on the glass, and then they were picking up too much profundity, and the league has got quite clear protocols where they want the mics and where they don't want them. So I think there's have to be within 6 inches of the top of the glass now. I think that's also consistency, but you know, and now they allow on the national games, you can put lavaliers inside the net, RF, because they're doing that. I mean, the Olympics is a whole other game because it doesn't have the regulations or the rules from the NHL, but in the NHL, they're pretty clear. But I think you go into some arenas and they only put 6 mics out. You know, it used to be years ago into MSG and they only had 4. Yeah. 3, I think. Wasn't it, Roberto? 3, didn't they have 1 behind each end and 1 shotgun at center?
Yeah, I think so. And then I would put more, or I remember being in Los Angeles for playoffs and we're doing a quick turnover from a Lakers game to a playoff game for the Kings. And the guy was not interested. The LA mixer, because usually the home mixer puts up those microphones. And he was busy selling his house. So I convinced my A2. I said, you know, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do hockey night with 4 microphones. Basically him and I were crawling underneath the benches and putting them out. But there are specific places they got to go to. But, you know, fans also know they're there. So some places, like the only place I can think of, I did the finals in Las Vegas, and they were going around telling people you can't bang on the glass, right? For me, the people bang on the glass are just people who failed physics. But like, for example, in Madison Square Garden, there's a person who's on the far right blue, and everyone knows about him. I'm not sure if he's still there, but every time the puck goes by, he takes a pen and he taps the glass. It was tick, 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 tick. And so you hear this thing in your mix and you're like, where's that coming from? And you'll keep opening up the mic, and then I mentioned it to the home show person, and the home show person said, oh no, he's always there. Just, we can't do anything.
Just season ticket holder, huh?
Yeah.
So that's the problem you have. You have microphones right near where the crowd is, and it is what it is. We used to hang them.
Yeah.
406s in Buffalo, Sennheiser 406s, eventually 416s, maybe over nets. We did that in the early Maple Leaf Gardens stuff. As Bob will remember, there were 2 Blue Line ones.
Yeah, the crank.
Yeah, death-defying, 14 stories up, no hand railings, like catwalk that you wouldn't want to go up on. And then when we did the Canada Cup, we hung more microphones, 2 microphones over the nets and 1 over the center. But they were shotguns. And in Maple Leaf Gardens, it actually sounded pretty good. We got a very good pickup.
Well, the ceiling in Maple Leaf Gardens was always so good for that.
Yeah.
And Montreal still has 6 816s that are owned by the building in the ceiling. So.
And then the audio problem, which we've just sort of touched on, and I think Ross was mentioning. Well, we've had to raise them up. They used to be a lot lower, but then they were in the shot, and no one wanted to see a little line in the shot. Yeah. And so basically they went higher and higher. Now they're becoming crowd mics, but at one point in time, you used to get great pickup, and people expected them to be there, and that is an issue. It's an issue. We have to hide microphones in a way that works for.
Or like I like to often say is that there's a person standing on the stage, and the producer will say, "This is not a sports thing. Is there any way we can hide the lavalier?" But they're standing next to 6 Verilights. Yeah. It's like, hang on. So the lights aren't an issue, but this size of a pencil eraser lavalier is, and it's like and the lights are making so much noise. It's like I don't think the mic is not a big deal. No, we don't want to see the mic.
The audio is always, the last thing, you know what I mean? When it comes to that.
But then we have to, I know that like on Hockey Night in the past several years for me, I do a lot of Bob Cole's games, and he would listen to his games, or his relatives would listen to games, and I get the report that, within hours after, what his sister-in-law thought of the game. Or Jim Hewson, who's I basically was paired with most of the time. Jim would watch the game in 30. And he's been around a long time. I'm sure Bob's done like a ton of baseball and stuff with him over the years. And
he did TSN hockey for the longest time, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Huey, yeah.
So Huey always basically watches the game after, and he'll tell you, et cetera. And he's very specific. He didn't want too much crowd in his ears. He wants to hear, and he doesn't want his voice over compressed. He wants it to breathe, and which I don't have a problem with. And but yeah, so, and those people, they report back, and they have a lot of influence. So we might be up against it, but in the end, we have to please production, but we have to please the announcers. They have to like how their voice is sounding, how things are going, and they need to hear what they need to hear. Bob would always talk about the crowd, and so to try to mix in. Yeah.
There's probably no better compliment when you're actually mixing the show that the on-air personality says something about the mix they hear in their headset. I mean, that happened to me like 2 games ago, and one of the players yelled to one of the other players, and Craig Simpson said something. He says, "Oh, you can hear him calling for it." And I'm going, "Yes."
Yeah, and Craig's got very good hearing. Incredible.
Yes, he likes
wearing headphones. He still has. He can hear everything.
Yeah, well, he's used to being on the ice, so he knows those are cues for him when he was a player. And that's the other thing when you get players that are versus commentators, the players, I always think, I've never played hockey that way, but, I've tried to learn what's important for somebody who's played hockey, what they would want to hear, so if somebody's sitting at home, it should sound like the way that they remember hockey sounding, and maybe less, like, as real as possible to that experience. I mean, that goes back to the years when I was doing curling, way curling was portrayed on, with all the microphones, when they started introducing the microphones, I mean, that's what curlers heard when they were seeing, because it was not really a spectator sport. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily go to a curling club and watch curling, but as a curler, you're on the ice and you would hear it, so you try to create that feel that you're with the players right on the ice. And then the commentators like it as well, because it's like, that's how they remember the curling.
Yeah, exactly.
And then maybe to answer Ross's question from earlier, right? Like, or someone's question is about, this is like music, right? If you've grown up and you started in music, and you're trying to, the musicians have got to like what you're hearing. I mean, it's from their perspective. When you mix a band, got to sound like they imagine it. And in a way, this is the same thing. I think Bob hit it on the head there.
So basically, you have to get into the head of the artist, and in this case, the artist is the audience in many ways.
Yes, and the announcers,
Right?
the lead singer, if you will.
Sure.
Yeah, that's actually a great way of putting it. And yeah, Bob, you're talking about curling, and that was exactly my experience with curling. Commentators for curling are the quietest ever because they're used to being quiet in the actual rink. So
curling is as for mixing sports. I mean, I did it for 16 years with TSN. And curling is probably my favorite, but probably the most fun if you like mixing. It's probably the best sport to mix because everybody follows the audio mix. You know, the cameramen listen to it, the commentators listen to it, the spectators, because you're telling a story. And I used to, not going to mention any names, there was one director I used to work with that would listen to program sound, and then there was another director that wouldn't. And I'm telling my own story, and it's up to you to cover it with the cameras. And curling is very much that way because you're PFLing mics and the cameramen, you know, they're going to pull focus, and it's very much mixing a movie live where, you know, one person's talking in the foreground, and the cameraman, because worked with them for so many years, you would sort of know that I'd noticed that the other group that you could see in the background talking about the same thing, but their defensive move to what's about to come up, where we were just listening to offense, and you can fade the mics from offense to defense on the curling. And if the cameramen are listening and the director's listening, you can lead that, and then they go and cover that, as opposed to cutting the visuals and you're trying to follow it. Because in curling, it's a very unique sport that way, is that if you cut the pictures to the action, the dialogue gets too choppy. So you really need to follow and let a sentence end or a thought end from a player before you now go to the other perspective. And it's when it's done well, it's a great sport to watch and to mix. It's great because you're telling stories, right? And you know how they're going to speak. On this person's not going to speak now, and you know you just get to know the idiosyncrasies of the actual competitors.
And the loudness range, dynamic range, I mean, is way more controlled. Like the chances of you clipping in a curling game are a lot lower than, say, like a hockey game. You know,
I don't. I've never mixed it on a digital board, so curling, but I've only done it in analog. And there's only the DVX 160 was the only thing that could actually deal with it. And I had my own that I traveled with. So
there you go. Yeah. Now the last Olympics, which Mariana worked on, and Bob, I'm not sure if you've caught any, but we had a lot of problems with our curling broadcast. Some complaints. We were sitting there listening to it, and one of Bob's old colleagues, Jeff Kozak, was with me, and I was listening, thinking, "This is wrong." I've done part of my way back history too, is I did curling a long time ago with, and
CHS.
Yeah, and the M for TSN in the days.
Yes, yeah.
Days, yeah, but. And it's great. I totally agree. It's totally fun. And but we're listening to this and thinking, what's wrong? Like there was no, like they would toss the rock and then they would get up and then we lost the rock. But there was like a lot of problems with the video. And the production manager used to be head of CBC Olympics. And I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, and I was speaking to him, and he said the Chinese decided that they were going to do curling. They've never done it before. They just watched it on TV. And they had, I was starting to talk to him about the audio problems, and he said, the audio problems were problem number 600, and these people didn't know how to frame their shots and where to go, and we were getting an unbelievable inconsistent. I think they decided that they're going to mix curling using only the lav mics, and they put the mics in, I was told, along the ice, but they never used them. They were never ever used, and so then basically the effects came and went, and then there was dialogue. But we're not in control of the effects. So now you're trying to mix dialogue on top for streaming and stuff. And it was, we just.
Wow. I didn't watch any of it. I'm sorry. That's too bad.
You're lucky. It was brutal. And I saw some of the, there was some comments for some of the people who've done a lot of curling recently, and they're complaining about it. But if you watch close enough, you can see that it was just, sometimes at the Olympics, the host country is going to want to do that venue themselves. And sometimes it can go well and sometimes it doesn't. Our previous disaster was Pyeongchang figure skating. This Olympics, it was done. It was the Chinese trying to do curling. They got better for a first try, but audio-wise, it was very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I noticed a bit of that actually. That's a good point. I felt like compared to the other sports that we were doing, that they were a lot more. It had a lot of more closed sound. Like you could hear the breathing and the rustling of the clothing a bit more. It just sounded weird compared to the other sports. I did notice that differently. So it's cool that you point that out because I had no idea about their different miking choices for that particular sport. That's very interesting.
One, at the Olympics, you don't always get to choose your gear. So where if curling, let's say done in Canada, would have been a preferred vendor or manufacturer, you're kind of, and they're very good for it, Audio Technica, but their microphones are provided throughout. There's as a sponsor, what I'm not sure exactly the full connection, but I mean, they do a lot of work and send a lot of good mics and a lot of good people there, but you know, the Audio Technica RFs may not be what everybody was used to using, you know, and setting gain structures and stuff like that, where you'd know after years and years and years using certain Sennheisers. I mean, we used to use Sony's way back. You knew exactly where to set them because of the dynamic range you'd have to deal with. You know, so if they were just taking them off the shelf and not fully, you know, setting it up correctly, you know, they would set it up just for, you know, the way the factory sets it up, it might not be very conducive to curling.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, so my next question is, it's kind of related to some of the things that we've been talking about. And it's, what microphones have you used in the past to capture sports? And what are specific microphone technologies for different sports? And also connected to that question is, if you could talk about some mics that are inside of balls or pucks, or there's this whole thing, I've seen it in previous expos, in previous AES events, like companies that make microphones specifically for putting them inside of balls, and what your experiences are with those, if those work, if those don't. I'm really curious about that, because all I got were just OBS sounds from Asia, so I didn't get to see that part. I only dealt with the commentary, so I'm really curious.
Well, I mean, I'm sure I have less to say about this than the other guys. From the dock side of it, like we used a lot of parabolic mics. So specifically in the football world, whether it was CFL or NFL, there's always a guy on the sidelines that's with the parabolic mic looking around. And so they had these, I think they were called Clovers. Is that right? The MK26 or something like that. And so we got to use those, and those were anytime we were doing any storytelling, because again, the whole point of the docs that we were doing was more like they were called Bills Embedded, and the CFL ones were, I forget the titles of those ones, but the idea was that it was all about like creating a storyline out of nothing. So whatever the game was, whatever the pregame was, whatever the storyline was between the two rivals of the games, we were just supposed to sort of create that content and create a story from whatever we're given. So we were just trying to shoot everything. We weren't like, okay, we're going to mic up this guy, and he's going to be our featured guy, or we're going to mic up this coach. Whatever was presented to us, and we just had to kind of find that action. So I was always there with a boom, trying to get the specific interview stuff. But we had a team of people that were sort of shooting whatever we told them on radio with the parabolic stuff, and that kind of, I mean, for me, that was very new, because we never worked with that in school or anything I'd done before. And so seeing the parabolic stuff in action was, I mean, that was super cool for me. And then seeing how useful it was later, because like he would, the editor would tell the story, he'd create what we had, and then the only content from the mics that he had were my boom, which I was sort of tethered to him what we were shooting, and then any live stuff that we were able to pick up just on the fly. But when I did the post on it, I was able to get all the game day footage from all these parabolic mics, and it was like, okay, now I have a real story. Now I can tell the whole thing from the audio side, and they can make shots usable without having to narrate over it. It was actually, I mean, that was revolutionary. But that was my first experience with that. I'm sure that happens a lot more in the broadcast than you'd think too, right?
Well, you want to go, Roberto?
You go. You have.
Well, there's two worlds out there, I guess I would say. Like there's the worlds where you don't, you know, that are the day to day where you don't pick and choose and you just pull the drawer open in the truck and you're going like, well, what do we got today? So it's like I got like 6 old 416s and a bunch of ECM labs, and that's what I have. And, you know, I think that's often the typical of a regional sports network show, or you're going in. I mean, there might be some specific mics, but you work with what's there. When you get to the Olympics, there's a lot more specialties, mics that have been pre-thought, pre-planned. And they're kind of hard to bring those in on the one-off Leaf games or whatever. Just not a lot of time. There's not necessarily the expertise with the audio assistants to put them out. So it's tough to integrate those into the one-day shows, you know, and it's always been nice. I mean, when you get the long, you know, the long lead time, it's fantastic. But I guess the work I do, I don't really, nobody says, well, what kind of mic would you like? There's a bunch on the truck, and you just make do with what you have. And, you know, and that's part of the challenge of the job, is to make those such that then nobody knows that, you know, you've painted a show that's worked, and nobody knows that the mics were 15 years old and half of them were, you know, went through 3 to find one working. You know.
Yeah, that's basically it. You have most shows are one-day setups. You got what you have. There's the odd time for Hockey Night, sometimes further in the past when it was more under CBC editorial control. We would always interview a player before the game, and he'd wear an IFB, and it would go back to Ron in the studio, or Strombo for a couple of years when he was there, and challenge. Your biggest concern is probably frequency coordination with the buildings. That's a big problem when you get to all-star or finals and stuff too. And then getting it on the player. Now, Ross, I'm not sure if you've ever seen, there's a new brand that everyone's using, NBA, GSX. It's a flexible microphone.
Oh, the Q5Xs.
Yeah, we use that.
They're excellent. So last all-star game that I did, we used them on the players. But then it got to the point now where we don't put them on the players anymore. The trainer does that. Yeah. And then the feed comes through us. And, you know, but years ago when I was at CH and we were doing the midweek game, I was the assistant, the A2. A1 is Bob and I now. And A2 is, well, when you're not the A1. And, and so then I remember going, it was Derek King. It was a Leaf game. And I was told, we're going to put a mic on him. And he just sat there patiently. I got duct taped. I was already working on red green. And I taped it to his pads, etc. And it was a beautiful Sennheiser pack. And in the middle of the game, he got in a fight. And so everyone's just laughing. He's in a fight, and the shirt's coming off. It was the 90s, right? They used to fight more. And you can see the mic getting torn, and you can see the pack is on the ground. And that kind of stuff happens. So things that you don't think about. So you're thinking about, you know, coordination, strength, non-interference with a player. He has to play. And then is it going to stay on? Can you get it off? And you want to get in and out of there as fast as possible. Probably no more than, if you're a film person and you're doing commercial work, it's the same idea. You want to get to the talent as quick as possible. But for sports, it's a tough thing, because that, you know, in hockey, they are going to get in a fight. They're going to fall down and things, and you don't want that your equipment to interfere with the field of play. But then very quickly, as far as mics in stuff, in Nagano, this was tried for the first time. I don't know what mic it was. Maybe Bob does, but they put mics in the ice for figure skating. And we kind of heard that this time in figure skating, because we would hear the odd lift and we thought, what was that, a dropout or a spike or something? But I read somewhere that they did embed some microphones in the ice. I don't know what kind of.
They had done the Audio-Technica had made, no, I'm not sure who made the ones in Nagano in 98. But they had put them in I don't remember, they put them at short track speed skating. Yes. But I know the big problem that they had, I don't know how many, they put in a couple of dozen in the ice. The problem was how the sound traveled in the ice. And you couldn't just open a couple of the mics, because they were all basically picking up the same thing. And as Ross was talking about earlier with phase, like one mic was you could hear a skater anywhere on the ice in one microphone. So they actually had to really set them up for very strong gating, so that only the mic that was with the group, you know, was basically opening or gated open, because otherwise it was just a massive amount of noise. You know, it was an experiment back on that one. And the microphone was neat, because it had it was about the size of a pea, maybe a little bit larger. And because much like with underwater microphones, you need the air to move from, across the diaphragm and the microphone. So the casing had to have air, the microphone had to be inside an air chamber, of which then had an outer chamber. So these things had to be melted, frozen into the ice, but they were, they had air inside them and then a capsule. So
that's cool.
But they were very susceptible to if anybody walking on the ice with a skate, all the mics heard it. It was very, very sensitive.
Yeah. And then so what happened on figure skating this time was a very odd mix. It was better than Pyeongchang, but you didn't get very many ice effects, and suddenly you get this big click somewhere, but it was in the middle of the ice. And one of the biggest things when you're mixing is same thing as music, is perspective. Like, you have a visual in front of you, and if you're on a wide shot, you don't want necessarily the far part of the boards to sound like the near side of the boards. If you're on a very wide shot, etc. But you're not getting a lot of stuff in the center of the ice for figure skating. So if you suddenly hear a skate sound that's bigger than a landing in the corner, you have a problem. And I don't think they were able to control that. It was, you have to tread carefully because you may not be able to control the balance. Too many mics are where they were put. And for us, it sounded like we had a flaw. When there's a problem in the Olympics, there's a number you call and you send it aside, and you try not to be too tough on people because no one deserves to have 100 countries phoning complaining about every kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we try to be respectful and professional, and sometimes you just want to know what's up. But it was there was just some very odd things that happened on skating, and I think we've tried that microphone a few times. I just don't think it's necessary because the skaters in the middle of the ice, they're just gliding through. The odds that you would have a mic right where a jump would happen in the middle of the ice is really low. In the corners is where the jumps happen. Yeah. So you always have mics in the most common areas. Figure skating is usually 18, 20 PCCs on the boards around. So it's a lot more finger waving to follow the blade, if you will.
Yeah, that's interesting. Has there ever been thoughts of putting microphones in the actual skates?
Who was doing something recently that way?
Because I heard that from somebody. Maybe it was.
I did it on Stars and Ice with Kurt Browning. So I used to do Stars.
That's right.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's right.
And he'd have a Y cord down his pants. It's the only time I've ever seen it. I'm not sure, Bob, if you've seen it other times, but we put a Y cord and put them on each of the skates.
No, but on the most recent Battle of the Blades, I think they tried something, but I think it was more, they may have been shooting it more documentary. I don't know if they used it live. I think it was when, I can't forget the gentleman who's the skater who's the host on Battle of the Blades.
The host would be Ron, isn't it?
Yeah, but his sidekick that would be the skater. Yeah.
Oh,
I'm not a figure skating fan, so.
Yeah.
But I thought they shot some stuff earlier in the day with him, and they but it was just as simple as putting a lav transmitter in his pocket, and they just ran the
Yeah. When I used it because it was right context, because Kurt does amazing footwork for those who follow figure skating, and he does a lot of little intricate stuff across the ice, and it's kind of nice just to have it delicately going through because it's the way he does it is so rhythmic and it just meshes in with the music. It's serving a purpose, I think, and so it was kind of worth trying it. And so I guess it was the production wanted it for a particular skate that he was doing. That's why we did it. But it's not that common because that's a lot of you've got the weight, and I'm not sure on this particular time I don't think he did a jump. It was all about his footwork. I'm not sure how you would, you'd have all those lines and wires and his bending and going up, etc. That'd be hard to get the strain relief on that microphone and the pack. And
I mean, it's getting better with the with the new Q5Xs. Though the worst part is the actual microphone cable, but the new MBA ones, which are the soft, pliable ones, right? Because that was designed to go in their waistband and their shorts,
and they won't feel it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but they track those players, they now have transponders and they're tracking their court time and their positioning on the court and all that kind of stuff. So that I think the players are used to wearing a little bit more that way. But
yes.
The Q5X, I mean, actually it's probably one of the, out of Kitchener is where they're Quantum. And Yeah, it's amazing what they've done with their stuff, and it's almost become the standard now in sports. If players wearing a mic, I mean, they're wearing Quantum, other than they're really not wearing anything else. So
Yeah, and they're actually our sponsors. Sorry to interrupt you there, Ross, but
No, no.
they're actually AES sponsors, Canadian AES sponsors. So thank you very much.
Is it
Well,
still now?
Oh, I was just
What are
going
you
to say that.
saying?
I was saying they're actually doing that in Buffalo. That they've got the Sabres when they're doing the documentary stuff. They're wearing that, and same with the Buffalo Bills. That's what they're using. Just awesome.
my quantum story is they I don't, God knows where they came from, because they were whatever they were doing, and one day they had approached TSN. This was back the early 90s, and they said, we've had this microphone, and the salesman sort of came across to TSN and said, we think this might be good for sports. And TSN said, oh, okay, well, we'll give it a try. And there was a freebie, the first Q5X that they had for sports. And so we started using on hockey. Huey was doing play-by-play then as well. So we started using this mic, and where the heck did these things come from? Because I'd never heard of them or whatever. And, it had the ENG Sennheiser receiver that had modified, God knows what happened inside of it. But it was amazing the technology that they were working with, because we'd have the wireless receiver, which was just an ENG diversity with the little stubbies, in the booth at the Montreal Forum, which is a steel building. And the very first night, the audio assistant put the microphone on the player, and I'm like saying to the audio assistant, I said, we've got a problem with the mic, that we're getting dropouts. So you got to go see the mic. There's either something's happening or something like that. Well, we figured out that there was no problem with the mic. The player was still in the dressing room, and we were in that building, in the concrete and the rebar, and we were still able to hear the player in the dressing room with a few little dropouts here and there. It's like, where have these been all my life? Because you used to get some VHF wireless mics that maybe work 75 feet, and this thing's through this whole building.
Wow.
And now they've progressed so much, but it's we were using them on TSN for that first hockey season. It must have been 94, 95 or something like that, and they were so unique.
That's farther back than I remember. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
I liked it that the reception is great, but also sometimes when you would try one of the other mics, you would hear the cabling moving. And I'm sure, Ross, if you're doing docs or different things, that would be a nightmare. You want the cleanest possible sound. You want it to be transparent, and these mics are transparent.
I have to say that our RX, the Isotope RX software, that actually saved me on a lot of these things. It can kill that. It can get rid of all of those external lav noises that you don't really think about until it's like, oh, this is ruining it.
You mean Isotope?
Yeah, Isotope.
Isotope, yeah.
It's crazy. It can literally kill all that.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, just in terms of like microphone, lav mics and frequencies and all that stuff, I got a funny story from like the first gig I ever did with the CFL, which is an excellent, this is what not to do. We were using, and again, the CFL, they don't have the same budget that the NFL has and all that, but we were using the mics that they had provided us from their headquarters, which were the, like the very low level Sennheiser ones, the EW something or other, like the like 100 series ones, right? Oh, no. And so we were using those for our referee doc. So we, the refs go out for CFL, they go out and they do a walkthrough of the stadium, and they just look at where their positions are going to be. And so we shot that pre-show, and we laved them up. We got all the great information that we needed, and we knew where our positioning was. And everything sounded great. And I had, I just had a little audio devices unit and 5 channels, whatever. And then the dome happened to be closed, in which we were told the dome was going to be closed for the game, which I didn't even really realize was, even going to be a problem. But the dome was closed. We did all our tests. And I didn't feel quite as bad, because the ref mics for the stadium, who clearly know that this is a problem, also had the same problem. But during the pregame, I guess they decided, oh, it's a beautiful day out, we're going to actually open the dome. So they opened the dome, and they let in every frequency in the whole city into that thing. And all of our mics completely were every radio station. So we lost, that first, 20 minutes of audio for that game, because everything was just, it was, I forget what station it was, but it was all the same station, and we couldn't get any connection. And it was also the ref's mic for the stadium was also on the same thing. So it wasn't like, oh, it's just purely just a noob doesn't know what he's doing. The pro at the stadium also had the wrong mic channel for their mic as well. So we were all just, we had panicking, it was all useless. So that was a story that I tell to people in my classes. I'm always like, make sure that if you're going to do a test with anything, make sure that the parameters are the same. And that's even true of like a live sound. If you've got a singer coming out for sound check and they're doing their sound check and it sounds great, and they come out on the stage for their actual performance and now they're wearing a hat, you've changed your entire frequency spectrum and all their feedback and everything. It's all gone. So it's all about consistency. And that was something that really we got in trouble for that. So it was a great story to sort of to learn from, I guess.
Well, even actually at the the Rogers Center, the RFI still gets into analog circuits there. I mean, it's still a problem when the roof opens up and there's certain mic lines down at the third base or first base that you listen carefully. I don't know how much they get onto TV, but in the audio room, you can hear radio.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it just gets into so you usually have to line up everything right at the source there, but it's just gets into everything. Right. But I mean, it's a giant antenna and you're in the ground plane. So it's not much you can really do about it when the roof's open. So.
Sure.
Yeah, downtown Toronto is the nightmare. It's well known. We have at CBC, we have issues with it. When they built the CBC in downtown Toronto, the studios are up on the 10th floor, and one of them is basically a Faraday cage. So, but we had issues, and I'm the coordinator for the building. So when Rogers was in there with Hockey Night Studios in there, we were pushing about 400 different frequencies if everything's turned on because of all the different news and stuff. But if you go outside, you're in just big trouble with the tower because we're right underneath the tower too. There is no space to find stuff, and it changes. Right. And now with the big shift and the 600's gone, and the TV stations have moved a bit, it's even more difficult. Just buy something high, run a 250 milliwatt electro.
Mm-hmm. Call them. Yeah. Just pee on all the frequency.
What was the worst venue acoustically that you had to work in? Like, I mean, the actual stadium or arena, the worst acoustically sounding or most problematic. It could be for RF reasons as well.
Well, I can tell you, this was sort of my answer for another question, but I can kind of give you an idea here. So a lot of what I do for the Sabres is mixing their game day audio, which again is often broadcast calls, but their game day audio for in-game presentation. So whatever the opening of the game is, like whatever's shown on the screen, that's what we're mixing for. And when I originally applied for the job, like, it was the word of mouth thing, but when they originally said, okay, well, what can you offer us? I was like, well, I don't know what to really do with this arena. I'd never been there before. And on a walkthrough, they have it's like a 25-foot like ceiling expanse where there's no sound paneling. They've dropped paneling from the ceiling, but it's like hanging straight down, and it's really just this huge pocket. Like it traps like 250, like you wouldn't believe. Like it's just this huge bass, like low mid bass trap kind of thing, and it affects the intelligibility of everything, not only just the playback, but also whatever's being spoken on microphones in the arena, and even like the refs calls from when they have to talk after a penalty, whatever. And what I did when I went in there is I was like, well, and I was thinking outside the box. I said, let me make a profile of the arena from various places in the stadium. So I used Altiverb. I don't know if you guys know that software. I used Altiverb, and I set up a bunch of mics around the different places in the stadium, and I shot it out through the PA, and I made an impulse response of the room. So I got, an IR of the press box where the owners sit. I got one of the gallery. I got one at ice level, one in the 200 levels, whatever. And then when I did the test mix for them, I used that here, and I ran the mix. Like I did the mix like I normally would, and then I ran that mix through Altiverb on the master bus with the setting of that room. So I put the different profiles on it, and effectively I was able to hear what that was going to sound like in the arena. And then I made a master bus EQ change before the Altiverb to tweak the mix to the master output, just to change where the dialogue was sitting and where the music was overlapping. And it made enough of a difference that you could intelligibly hear the dialogue. You could hear where the differentials were in the play-by-play, the announcers versus the crowd, whatever. And then when I sent them the mix and they listened to it in the arena for their test, they couldn't believe that it sounded that much different than all the other audio post stuff that they did. So you know, the biggest thing with that arena is that it's got this huge low mid bass trap, and being able to now profile that for everything that we do, it instantly makes that venue listenable. Because I don't know if you've heard stuff in there, if you've ever been there, it's horrible. You guys must have been there. It's really quite horrible, expansive audio. So, so this effectively fixed it for them, and I built that profile so that they can do like their smaller budget, the stuff that they don't necessarily have to outsource, and they just put that as a preset in Premiere or whatever they're editing in, and now they can hear that in their room or in their headphones, whatever, before they even send it to the game day. And so I would say that's the worst venue I've ever been in acoustically. Which I guess was
I was going to say the Saddle Dome is pretty bad, but it's one of the oldest ones now too. So,
right. But yeah, that was an interesting thing to use technology like that to basically to land a job. Like, you know, that was probably the only reason I got that as a really a nobody. Like, oh, you did some Canadian football, like to then be working in the NFL and NHL world. That was really the difference. That was what I did that the other people didn't do and couldn't deliver the same level without testing it. So, I mean, it plugs Altiverb. If you guys have used that, like I love those guys. Actually, that's the screensaver that's on my background here. It's all the Altiverb spaces.
Altiverb, yeah. It's brilliant you're doing that. Most people wouldn't bother doing that. But it's like knowing your venue. I think when I was in post, I did some commercial. I had to do commercials and stuff for the Blue Jays, and some stuff played in the Rogers Center. Just the same issue. There's a lot of low end rumble, and you know, maybe I think they said a lot of people who did stuff before they would, you know, they would mix it like for radio with a ton very compressed and low end. And once that low end gets going in a bowl, in most arenas and bowl, it's gonna go out of control. And so you have to mix for the venue instead of for your room. I think in arenas, I always thought Scotiabank was really loud. Then Mike Hayes, my assistant, and I at the time were in Nashville, and things can also change. You might know a venue, and in the middle of game one in a Stanley Cup final, and I was getting no effects. I was going, what happened? What's going on with this PA? And Mike sent me a picture in the middle of the first period, and he went underneath the stands. He said, every section has these giant, gargantuan, like, you know, speakers the size of a refrigerator bins underneath every section that they put in just for the finals, so that it's louder than they even were before.
Where is this?
So, Nashville.
Nashville, okay.
So Nashville and Las Vegas, I think,
they're not many louder. Vegas, I was just there for the All-Star game. It was insane.
Were you there? Yes.
Insane, yeah.
It's clean, but it's loud as hell.
Wow.
Yeah, it's loud.
Yeah,
I mean,
go
ahead.
I'll never complain about Scotiabank Center again. These guys are infinitely louder. Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
I was going to say, because Scotiabank's gotten really bad during the NBA. I haven't done many hockey games since they put the new system in. A few, but not regularly. But I did a bunch of NBA last season, I guess, and it's brutal. Like the commentators, when they do their opening on the court, they're right off the bat. Like the producers are saying, "What's with the sound?" I've got two mics open on the court. That's the PA, and the broadcasters were complaining because it was so bad, so loud.
Yeah, well, I guess to answer Mariana's earlier question, what mics to use, sometimes it comes down to the simplest thing. So Dome is a supplier for most of the trucks. And so years ago, just before I got back to CBC, I was doing NBA shows and visiting shows. And you'd have Tommy Heinsohn from the Boston Celtics standing at center court and someone else. I think he's passed away. And yeah, the two guys would do their open on the court, but you'd have an Omni, a 635 or an RE20 or something that was in the trucks at the time. So a couple of other guys said to hell with it. I bought my own Sennheiser Md46s, which is the standard mic that you see now everywhere. I bought a couple of my own because I got tired of putting up two microphones and not being able to hear guys talking to it. And the director will scream at you, turn down the effects, basically, you know, the sound of the arena. And I don't have any effects mics open. I just have those two microphones open. They're pointing up at the PA though. And we will get yelled at for that kind of stuff. So better microphone helps. But even with that better microphone, it's, you know, it's almost like Indy car racing where you almost need like a little shotgun mic.
Does this come down to the the front of house person at the venue, or whatever you want to call it, the broadcast up in the booth? Like, are they just mixing too loud? Are they just really happy?
You want this one, Bob, or do you want me to go ahead?
Well, I mean, I'm sure we could both have different sort of similar answers, but maybe different aspects. I don't know where the NBA is at now. The NBA used to be very clear about SPL levels, and I believe they still have guidelines. But that's only during play, I believe. That doesn't affect any sort of other festivities that are going on in the building. So they do control the SPL level between home team and away team possessions. That there's specific numbers they can't exceed. So basically, so there's not an unfair advantage to the home team with communication and stuff like that. I don't know other leagues that have that, but again, I know those guidelines don't affect when play is not underway. I think so. Anything during halftime or whatever is a free for all. The Olympics is pretty good about it. There's but the Olympics where they're different is everybody works together at the Olympics. So, the IOC being the overall, so then there's broadcast OBS side of things, and then there's the sport presentation people, and they kind of report to the same people. So if you're mixing an event and the PA is too loud, you just pick up the phone and say the PA is too loud, and the PA comes down but that doesn't happen in any of the pro sports.
Right.
But that's affecting the overall quality of the Olympic broadcast. So that's why it happens right away.
Yeah, we've complained, we've asked production sometimes, and I guess I'll tell us, this is, by the way, not a criticism at all of the people at the Scotiabank Center, which I know personally, and I'm sure Bob does. And we're told that they're told to do that. We've had A2s measure unofficially at ice level at about 115, 116 dB. Like for things, and I think we've gone beyond that sometimes, and if that's illegal, and apparently they pay a fine. There is a fine for going over, but they gladly pay it, and they just go over again. You shouldn't sit there for 3 hours. I'm going to sound like the old guy now. You should wear a hearing protector.
What about you're saying SPL levels? Obviously, we're talking about PA volume, but what about when the crowd is just into it, and they must be able to cap those volumes, right? So how could you pull that back? You can't really, right?
It is what it is, but the only thing we can control is the PA level. And what happens if the crowd gets louder, that PA will go up to try to get on top of them.
Will they ever sweeten a crowd? Will they ever go, okay, well, the crowd's really not that into it, so let's pump some audience into the PA? Will they do that?
The only time I know of them doing that in any of the pro sports I've done was been during the pandemic. But
I think they did it in Jersey, I think, Bob.
Okay, and I know an example, it's maybe not crowd, but in Calgary, they, because of the acoustics of the Saddle Dome, is at the upper bowl seats, you can't hear the ice. And we would feed an ice effects in Calgary to the public address system, and they would, in the upper seats, they would pump some ice effects into that.
Interesting.
I don't know who else, any other places specifically. I know Calgary specifically because it's very soundproofed up top, and the way that it goes, the hat goes up at the top. You can sit there and you can watch the game. You can't hear anything on the ice. So I've been told. I'm always in the truck. So, but it's like, why do they want but you don't hear it on any of your mics down below. Like it is just way up top. So I'm sure there's some arenas that do it. I mean, it was actually during the NHL pandemic, what they were doing with the enhanced audience, what they call the EA. I don't know how many people know about how they were doing that, but they actually had people. I'm not a music guy, so I'm not going to get everything right, but they were using keyboards and they had all the sounds, so that they actually had a person in the arena who was like the oohs and the ahs.
Right. Interesting.
But the person knew the game well enough. That you had to be able to anticipate, because when there was a shot on net that missed, then the audience reaction needed to represent it's like a disappointment that it didn't, so it's not just crowd sound, there was disappointment. And not that the two guys that were doing it, one in Edmonton and one in Toronto, did a fantastic job because it sounded really, really good. And the other thing, which I guess I think in our industry they know about it, but maybe not the general public, is all those effects came from EA Sports, I believe. So who makes NHL the game?
Right.
And they had gone to all the arenas as part of the games, part of the gaming package before the pandemic, because it was something that they did. They had recorded all the individual arenas.
Right.
So when we were doing a game in Toronto, the enhanced audience that they were running in the arena was unique to the home team.
Wow.
It wasn't just generic. So you could hear like, it'd be like "Go Habs Go" versus, "Go Leafs Go."
Right.
And the sound of the organ and all that kind of stuff was unique to each. So they had a file set for each home team, which was really, really interesting. I thought that was an interesting
that's
development. Yeah.
That's really cool. So
That's
taking
neat.
some stuff from the gaming industry, right? Like EA games.
Exactly,
So
because
I see that. Interesting.
Because nobody had recorded all that with all the individual elements, but the gaming people had as part of their product. They already existed.
Was so this sound you're talking about, this was in so the players were hearing this, or this was
Yes.
just for the broadcast? Oh wow.
No, it was in the public address in the erase I mean, it really was for the players, because they could have just sent it to us, but there was only maybe 100 people in the building. And the players wanted it, and a lot of the level that it was at was for the players. I think the first couple of days, it was kind of there, and then I think they started bringing it up a bit more because the players were starting to feed off of it, and they recognized, because I don't think they were fully aware of it or part of the decision, but then they realized it, and then they realized that it was, oh well, that's the horn that's always at our game at home, and they started recognizing it was as their home arena sound, versus just a generic goal horn.
So your broadcast would actually be of the on-ice game, but also balancing out this sweetened crowd. So your broadcast would reflect that. So would you have to treat that differently? Or is it similar as to having an audience?
Similar to having an audience. I mean, it came down as a stereo feed. I don't know. Was it 5.1? It might have been a 4.0. It might have been a 4.0. I can't remember.
Wow.
I think when I did it was we had to upmax it.
Yeah.
I can't.
Well, yeah, it was just, you just laid it in the mix where you normally have a bunch of stereo crowd mics. You just sort of brought it on the console. You just had one sort of feed of it. So it was like I said, I thought that was a very interesting development in that game. I mean, you can't beat the natural sound.
Sure.
But it was amazing how realistic it was, and the guys got better as the games went on. They learned and on the fly, because they were music guys. Didn't Cozy did one of them?
Cozy did it, yes.
He was in Edmonton.
I think.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think who did Toronto.
And when I did some games last year, there were two different guys that did it though, and one person was better than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And you could tell, like 5 minutes in the game, and one guy it's very difficult to do. He would miss. And it's kind of like, if in sweetening, if you miss, you need to let it go. Don't put a reaction 5 seconds late.
Right.
Like, don't emphasize.
Yeah, it's worse. Yeah.
Yeah. And but the other guy was really good, and Cozy was quite good. It's just you have to
know the game.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's really, because I remember because I'm trying to think who was doing it in Toronto, which might have been the good guy that you're thinking of sort of later on. But they sat in the broadcast booth, or the broadcast booth up in the gondola watching the game, and they had the keyboard with them, so they were watching the game in front of them. They were not watching television. Right. They watched the game.
Yes. So I think they were using Ableton.
Ableton, that was it. Yes.
Right beside. That's what I used to play back music.
One more point of clarification. So just so I remember, so if you were doing a regular game with a regular audience, you'd have your audience mics in the room, and those would be coming down on your channels for mics, whatever, and then the broadcast would be the game ice plus the room, whatever. Now with the sweetened audience, were you using the room mics to capture the sound of the no crowd but the sweetened crowd in the room, or were you getting a direct feed of the sweetened crowd from the playback of Ableton?
Both. You'd get a direct feed, and you would probably put out a bit of your own ambience to get that bit of a delay.
I see. So it was
if you wanted to create any type of rooms, some natural reverb.
Wow, that's actually really, honestly, that's awesome. That's really cool. That's my favorite thing I've heard.
Yeah. And the best part is they didn't emulate the person banging on the glass.
Right. That's right. Or that guy with the pen.
Yeah. No, the two guys that did Edmonton and Toronto, it was fantastic. You just sat there and listened to it, like, wow, this is really good. And they're doing 3 or 4 games a day.
Wow.
In the bubble, that's not easy. That's a long day.
And no one will probably have the opportunity to do that job for quite a while, right? Like that's
Well,
not a job anymore.
no, but you know what would be interesting is I remember the last game I did before the pandemic, I was in Florida doing a Habs game, and Bob will attest to this. Well, maybe this year people go to games in Florida at where the Panthers play, but there was
Yeah.
5,000 people at the game, and uh, if some of those arenas, when they get nobody in the audience, they could really use that mixed
Yes.
in. Right, the best sweetening, just like because when I did TV shows, is when you mix the fake stuff with the real stuff, then then the whole thing seems real. And I think some of those arenas really, I'm not sure if they are doing it, but they should.
Mm.
You don't want to hear 5,000 fans, 3,000 fans. It'll sound like a junior arena, and that's bad branding by the NHL.
Maybe they'll do that in Arizona with their new arena. Maybe they'll bring that out.
There's lots of people. I was just in Florida, and it's not 5,000 people anymore.
Oh, finally, good for them.
Yeah, well, they're number one in the East, right? So it was
Yeah.
Well, but it was probably about half the arena was probably Leaf fans. So
Yes, the Leafs were there. Yes,
yeah.
But for this thing, with the game I did was a tribute to Roberto Luongo, longtime goaltender, and I think they got 8,000 or 9,000 for that, and that was it.
Well,
I'm trying to think.
you're trying to think. Sorry.
No, I'm just trying to think what any of the arenas now that I've been to in the last 2 years that are the spectators are doing. The spectator base is doing better in a lot of the arenas now. I think hockey's got a pretty good product out there. So I think, I mean, I guess there's a few markets struggling, but the ones I remember traditionally struggling don't seem to be anymore. But.
I wonder if the sweetening is still going to be maintained even post-COVID now that audiences are back into arenas, and in some cases even to full capacity. Like, do you think they're still going to maintain them even post-COVID? Is it going to become like new standard?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, if you've got a great crowd, you can't beat that, and especially if you're used to the building. The live mics, just, especially if you have a couple of your go-to mics, that I'm sure everybody's got their favorites for doing some of the sports, but you have the play, you're instructing the audience just to put them where you want them because that's where you're expecting them to be. And you sort of have your, not tricks, but again, it comes down to, my mic, this microphone, I'm used to doing it. I'm going to EQ it this way. I'm going to set the dynamics this way. So I'm getting what I'm expecting. I think that's also some of the style for sports mixers is what they do with the crowd, because there's not a lot of other things. The commentary is commentary, and the ice effects. I mean, you can get into some dynamics and stuff, but it's. And I know I'm using hockey specifically, but I think any sport that the mixers where they would probably the most creative part they would add would be where they put their crowds and how they run their crowds into the mix. I had a producer once say to me that we're talking about something, and I took it as one of the better compliments I did. And I didn't know he liked my mix that much, but it was years later, we're sitting in a bar or something like that, and I said something about a prospective job that I was being asked to do in the States, and he said to me, "Oh, they'll like your mix," and it was like, oh, but I didn't realize that it was still memorable, that out of the 3 or 4 guys that it was a CFL producer, and I guess out of the 3 or 4 guys that mix CFL regularly, it was just interesting is that this was like 4 or 5 years since I'd mixed a game for him, but he said, "Oh, they'll like the way you do your games." So I think but that's that crowd element to it. I mean, it's not about these specific field effects, I don't think, or way the commentary is mixed. I think it's the way that soundscape you build. And that's the live crowd.
Yeah, it's important. If you don't put out enough, you could get a localized sound and some idiot selling popcorn or something. And you need a feel. I think maybe what they liked about Bob's mix is that he captured kind of the feel of an arena, and you have to strategically place your mics and enough of them out there to get that to get it so that works and it feels like the crowd. You won't catch mixes where you're not, the announcers will refer to the crowd, etc. And it's happened recently on a basketball game I saw, not here in Toronto, watching on TV, and they referred to the crowd, and I thought, I can't hear them.
Mm-hmm.
And
whenever I've dealt with some newer mixers starting out and stuff like that, you know, I often talk about like it's there's the layering, but there's also the dynamics. So, you know, when you have a goal scored in the first 5 minutes, and I'm going to hockey, but hockey is a really good example because it's controlled but uncontrolled, I guess. But you know, the home team scoring a goal in the 5 minutes into the first period has to sound different, even though the crowd might, but for the viewer at home, it has to sound different when that's a winning goal at the end of the third. Like that's the experience. I mean, that is a far more exciting goal and far more important. And so I would tell guys, like, you have to remember that as good as the first period set, you have to leave yourself somewhere to go in the third when it gets really exciting. If you think about building the excitement through the game, and it's important. You just, you know, you really can't go to 11. Like, you can only go to 10. So you want to maybe save that 10 for the third period. Right. If you're thinking of the storytelling. And not that you can't do that in the first, but I mean, the crowd gets louder too. So now you're dealing with dynamic, you know, it gets louder and louder and louder in the building, but you know, we're still restricted to a very finite amount of voltage we can send out, you know, to keep the dynamics there for home, but you want to create that excitement.
That's a great point. I love that as an idea, just that you would tell a story with the game. The first period should be as an after, like less important really than the third period in terms of then it's like a play. You know, you're focusing on the first act, the second act, all that. I imagine that for something giant like a Super Bowl or the Stanley Cup Finals, like the playoffs, I imagine that starts, even the first period there is probably starting higher than a regular season game anyway. So how do you judge that? Is your, you know, your home opener third period goal, where does that relate to your Stanley Cup Finals first goal, right? Like, you know.
Well, but then your anchor is the dialogue. So I guess you just sort of judge that in relation to the dialogue, because a dialogue, I mean, if you go back to the film in the, you know, 5-1 world, I mean, that's your anchor channel. So how much is the commentator buried? There's one way to control that without, you know, necessarily getting louder. I mean, you know, the producer I used to work with, he says, make them, you know, you always used to say at a certain point, make them fight it. You know, and you know, so when the play-by-play guy is, it's getting louder in his headset, you're causing him to be louder as well, and shout a bit more, which sounds more, you know, excitable because he's changed his voice from the first period, you know, and that's they're responding to your mix.
Yeah, I like that, Bob. Go ahead.
So I was just gonna say, we did a thing for God, what's the Buffalo play-by-play announcer? Rick Jenneret. He just retired, and so I got to listen to, like, you know, hours of his old playback and like stuff from, you know, the early, I guess he started in the 70s, whatever. The difference in audio quality then and where it's like clearly the audience in the room is nothing. There's like, it's just like an afterthought. There's one mic, and then as it gets progressively more modern, you hear his reaction to the room is different. And a lot of the time we get his isolated audio. You know, we'd put our own crowd next to it. You would still hear the crowd even in just his single microphone too, right? I guess because the crowd in the arena, were they always in the top broadcast booth, or were they sometimes lower in the arena?
They're always up top.
They're always up top.
For hockey.
You could still you heard a lot of, when he was speaking on his own, you'd still hear a lot of the crowd on that isolated microphone anyway. And again, like you said, the reaction of him was actually more like the arena is a reaction, whether he was being fed maybe an audio signal of the mix or something. But the 70s plays were crazy because you'd hear these ones where he's just completely clipping the microphone. He's so excited, but the audience is so subdued underneath it, and you kind of wonder what's going on, right? So we had to sweeten that, you know, in post. Yeah,
in the old Odd, at the beginning of my career, I did games in the old Buffalo Auditorium. It was very, very steep. Like if you walked up and down those stairs, you feel like you're going to fall over. And so I'm not sure if anybody, but I try to remember where he would have been back then. I think he was kind of more separated from the crowd. I think he was in another booth. The visiting guys were in a bucket on the end of a balcony.
Oh, really?
Yeah, maybe Bob, you did some games back there. I think I did some splits there, but it was really unbelievable where they put them. You had to walk to where the railing was, and then the visiting announcers had to climb over railing to sit.
Yeah,
Over
that's right. Yes,
yeah.
yes. So when you mentioned the railing, now I'm picturing that. Yes.
Yeah. And then I was doing, I think one of the first games I did was New Jersey, and the guys in New Jersey, I got the and so the camera shot and said, I spilt my drink. And of course, right underneath him is like all the other fans. But Rick and those guys were quite more separated. I don't know. It was a very loud building. I'm kind of.
The odd was, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm trying to figure out why that would be very isolated. Rick is really loud.
Like, yeah, he's loud. He's kind of like Joe Bowen, though, right? Like when he was on Sportsnet all those years. I mean, I only know him on the radio now, right? But I guess the radio is similar, is it not? The feed that they would get.
They get a mix from the TV mixer, is what the radio would get. Yeah,
right.
We would send them a mono.
Yeah, he's always above that mix, like especially when it comes to the radio. He's always like heads and tails above. It's not like a TV mix where he's sunk in it. He's very much like this, right?
Radio prefers that. I remember when I would do Raptors for a while. I think Bob, I don't know if they still do this, but you had to create two mixes: the TV mix and then a radio mix, which had less effects in it.
Yeah, and no POV effects, right? So no camera mics, that kind of stuff, right? You just want a bit of ice and ambience. Well, and actually a lot of the now if I do hockey games, there's usually I do a house mix, a radio mix, and then there's my mix for TV, because house is feeding in-house cable systems. So it's almost a TV mix, but not quite. You know, usually skip. They want a lot of ice and crowd, but I wouldn't feed them handhelds in case you don't need people yelling. But then on TV you want that. But then on radio they don't want a lot of ice effects because they don't want a lot of, as I said, point of view kind of stuff. And then the old stories back to baseball. I don't know if the Jays were this way, but I remember the Montreal guys is that all they wanted was crowd. They didn't want bat crack or anything like that, because if they were telling a story, you didn't know whether there was a hit or not until they said it. So, when they say, they would sometimes delay what was happening on the field as a common in radio for baseball, and that was, a fly out to the, left center field or something like that. And it may have already happened. The guy's already running back, but, for a radio person, it didn't really matter, or the radio listener.
Yeah. It's a different ballgame. I think, as you said, they are storytellers, and their timing is everything. They have that's how they fill their spaces. But you'll notice in other sports. I was noticing on a Raptors game, I was listening on the car, and and they'll say, and that was an and one or whatever, but a free throw had already happened. You can tell he was just tying it up, and there's no way that could have happened in that sequence in 10 seconds. But and anyway, that's kind of it's different. TV has to follow. You have to follow the picture. It's I get more similar to mixing for film or post, etc. Perspective is important. When you're doing sound effects editing or etc. It's the tie-in is TV is closer to film or television post than it would be for radio.
It's always the argument when early on in the TSN with Mike Noonan, which I don't know if he's watching tonight, but I remember we used to always have a fun discussion to have is when you're doing a 5-1 mix for sport, when you're doing a motion picture 5-1 mix, your anchor channel dialogue is in the front, dead center to the screen. But if you're doing a hockey game, wouldn't it not make more sense that the commentators were behind you? Because why would they be on the ice? And you think about the acoustic localization and stuff like that, and we often joked like, "Oh, perhaps it'd be better that the commentators." And they did try. I believe they did do a CFL game that way as a test way back. It actually broadcast and had the commentators behind, and just the field effects in the front, and just to sort of explore that, because now you're sitting on the couch, and it's as if the play-by-play and the color guy are sitting on the couch with you, which is really where they are, anyways, in the perspective.
That's so odd. That's such an odd approach. I can't imagine it. Like, it would be, I don't know. It's just against so many rules that I can't imagine how that would be like.
But the point is, I guess, is like, and I guess what I would always is not sort of argue the point is, but there's dialogue and there's commentary. And are they really the same thing? When you think about voiceover versus dialogue on the screen, I mean, in motion picture, in the mix, I mean, the dialogue kind of matches where the person is on the screen, but commentary is different because it's basically, it doesn't have an anchor. Though, as humans, we're used to it being dead center. But
that's true.
To me, and this is more of a critique of how people consume 5.1 technology, but like I know my parents, and like I'm an audio guy. I try to teach my parents how to be in audio. My mom's surrounds are like the one's over there and one's over this. Like, why do you have it there? Well, it's I like to hear it closer this way. It's like, okay, well, clearly not calibrated. So in my world, I bet you more people are like that than we want to believe. Like I would love to think every time we do a 5.1 mix, it's translating perfectly, but I'll bet you most people have their left surround in the bathroom. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they probably don't. So I would wonder how effective that was for a lot of people. They probably got a lot of complaints, like, oh, the center's wrong. Like, I don't hear what's going on,
Yeah, no, there's a lot to be said about stereo.
Or mono, for that matter, right?
Well, I don't know. I think stereo adds in. I think the whole ambience of the room changes with stereo. I think a poorly aligned 5.1 system is not a great way to experience television, or even a film for that matter, or anything. I mean,
for sure.
But stereo is a little harder to screw up at home. So
that's true. Though I've seen when people talk about like the original stereo recordings when they were flying the Beatles records over here, and they were just going, well, let's put John and Paul here and George and Ringo over here. It's like, well, that's not him. And they got the drums here, whether that was a stylistic thing or not, but that's what I was told people were doing. Like, they were just going, oh, just throw them one and one and that'll be fine.
Yeah, the concept was different. I think the imaging thing is something that people have learned as time goes along. I think they'll solve some of it. I think, if you buy a 5.1 system now, it comes with the microphone, it does the auto setup.
Yeah.
So many pictures. A big problem is, people have a lot of junk turned on their TV set too, like all this auto stuff, and it should all be really turned off. We did, when I was at CH and we were doing mid-weeklies, we were the first to do it in stereo, and we simulcast it with Q107. So this is going back to like 1993, 1992. And you always try something, right? And I think that's part of what we should do is I'll try anything once. And that's why I loved Bob's story with Michael Noonan putting something in the back. Yeah, they once did an NFL game with no announcers. That was the thing in the 80s. And I think that should be an option. I hope the announcers we know are listening. I doubt they are. And, but what happened with us is we thought stereo, and I remember Jim McCauley was a senior mixer at CBC at CH at the time, and I was, we alternated games, and Bob Senior, like the three of us, and so we decided we're going to pan the goals hard left and hard right, and we panned it that way. Of course, it's odd because if you shoot from behind the net, but panning that doesn't matter. But we thought we're going to just open up the image and leave it this way, and we put out the extra mics, and so we had two responses. It was the best sound that they ever heard. And the other half the responses, depending on which cable area you're in, and what kind of TV sets you had, what kind of decoders. If you think about the old stereo decoders that were on the TV sets, that little red light a long time ago. They didn't hear any, we were so wide that they completely lost the announcers in the center. So of course we had, all these compliments and complaints coming in. And so the decision eventually was to pan it back, to play it safer. So Ross, so sometimes it's people's setups, but sometimes it's, and this happens for us in TV right now. It depends what channel you're hitting, what broadcast chain it's going through. It'll sound different from network to network. But back then with decoders, if you had something that was very extreme, you might jeopardize the center part of your signal.
Anyway, sorry, do you have anything else to add?
Nope,
sorry to interrupt. Nope. Yeah. So I have one more question before we go into question periods, and we have we have about 4 questions from people watching the stream. So one thing I would like to ask before we get there is, what are the specific pressures and social skills required when recording, mixing, or doing broadcast audio for sports. So I'll answer this one first and then move on to you. So for me, what I've noticed is you have to be an amazing team player, probably more than any other audio engineering task, because there's always going to be a bunch of people involved, more than any other audio work, in my opinion, so far that I've done so far. In terms of everybody being on the ball in real time at that point in time, and everybody wanting to use the same language across the board so that things are communicated and understood very quickly and everybody reacts to changes very quickly. So those are things that I've noticed. And what else can you guys say about your experience? Like, what pressures and social skills people who may be watching and thinking, oh, I want to get into this, what do they need?
Good time management. Yeah, I think, I know in sports, in the live TV sports, I mean, you have to really love what you're doing, because it's, and I know a lot of people say this about other jobs, so yeah, but it can be quite thankless and misunderstood. And most people look at it as just a problem area. And I'm talking about this, not so much about the audio person, but the audio team, is that, you know, they just cause more problems than they're worth. And, you know, it's I know it's not the way, but it's a perspective often. And you have to appreciate how good of a job you've done yourself, because you're not going to get a lot of attaboys. I mean, you may from the producer, and some commentators are very good about it, but it can be somewhat thankless, because the problem, you know, my biggest problem of the day was never heard, you know, or that, you know, there were the three things that I take home that night that I was really, really upset about. Nobody ever heard them, and they upset me more than anything. So you have to be able to get over that, because when you do have a really good game, not a lot of people will even say anything to you, and the struggle to get there some days is an insane day. I mean, so you have to be confident in your abilities and not be looking for praise, because it's not a job in the live sports world that gains a lot of praise on a day-to-day basis. So you have to be very confident in that you can do it, and your best work is going to be good enough. And I mean, in a good way, that it's going to be good enough. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but
no, that's good. I think I think unfortunately if you do a good job in audio, nobody really even notices it. They only notice if it's bad. If someone's talking about the audio, it's always bad. And I don't think that's just sports though. I think that's also true of, like, oh, did you hear the way that song was mixed on the radio? Oh, I couldn't hear the dialogue in that movie. Oh, the sound effects were like, I think it's everywhere, but I think specifically in sports, it's more about the patience, because of how many people there are in a team. And just like we sort of talked about the Olympic stuff, like there are so many moving parts, and with any sports organization, it's you're dealing with, like, I remember one time we were doing a doc for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and we're following the practice. And, you know, there's 40 people on the field, and we were just following it and covering our player. And the coach, who we don't have any to do with the coach, he literally singled us out and kicked us off the field and banned us out of the, you know, and like, we're the audio team. We're invisible. We weren't doing anything. We were just there. We were presence. And I imagine he had something to say to the team that was perhaps more private, but, you know, we are now dealing with him. We have nothing to do with him, and now we're part of that group. And then we're dealing with the broadcasters. We're also dealing with, you know, the video team, and then the broadcast video team. It's like we're really kind of the chameleons of it, but we have to make sure everything works, and we can't tell anyone that we have problems when we do.
That's all above. Bob mentioned time management. I remember early in my career when I was the assistant and we're having a lot of issues, prioritizing. Things go wrong. You're not going to do 100 hockey games, or let's say golf. Lots of things can go wrong in golf or something. Or just on an RF shoot. I've had many things go wrong on stuff like that. And something happens, you have to be able to deal with it. And so you need to solve it, but you need your progression, your multitasking has to be there, that you can still move the show along. If you're going to air at 7:30, You know, I remember Jim would say, if we had problems, it was that, well, we got a booth, we have a show. We don't have everything else working, but the booth is there, this is functioning. What else doesn't need to work? So you prioritize what's most important to get to air, and then, you know, other things can go, and then you bring them back. This happens in video too. We were in Detroit, the old Joe Louis, which is a horrible building, and the technical producer Mark Scott. We at one point lost everything. We had one camera. Hockey Night usually has more than 20, and and basically the game had started. We had a show, but we had one camera, and then we gradually added. So the same thing there. Prioritize, get things going. But be able to communicate with people. You have to be able to communicate with everybody, production, etc. You have to be able to espouse your confidence, just like a musician. I have things under control. You need to also communicate with them briefly. They don't want to hear our sad stories. So when you have a chance to speak to an EIC who's, say, in the mobile, it's the engineer in charge, and you've got a couple questions, you know, try to hit them earlier in the day, all at once, not 20 times during the day at different points in time, to gain his confidence. And just think ahead, think of your problems, be ahead, and then put the whole thing together, because we're on our own. So we're expected to solve all the problems on our own and be there. And if everything goes well, no one will probably thank you, but you'll certainly hear it if it does not go well.
And Roberto, I would expand on from there as well, is that one of the things I think is, I'd say not unique. It's not unique to audio, but I think, an interesting element of sports in the live sports truck is that there's on a 50-person crew, there's 5 people dealing with audio and there's 45 dealing with visuals. And when you're the A1 or the senior mixer, you are the expert. You know, the producer doesn't have a higher listening authority or critique than you. You are the end all be all at the end. If there's noise in it, it's your problem to fix. There's nobody you can go up to fix that. And even the engineers, you'll be, how often you'll be sitting in the audio room going like, do you not hear that? And the engineer, no. There's a problem, with the MADI stream coming in, and you'd sit there and you'd say, and you'd point at the speaker and you say, do you hear that? So, but you're the person that the buck stops there, I guess, when it comes to certain audio things. And it's hard to, you either have to, people are going like, well, it doesn't sound that bad, and going, oh, it's really bad, because you don't know what's going to happen downstream when that's been up mixed and down mixed and stuff like that. And it's into that grandma's speaker at home. They're not hearing, that's all they're going to hear or whatever. And nobody else understands that. I know that sounds a bit of martyrdom, but you're the person that has the most knowledge in that area. And exactly. There's nobody down the line anywhere in that path where the audio travels that knows more about it than you, except for maybe another audio person. But there is nobody in that trail. That other audio person, if they're listening, chances are is at home. The master control person is only listening for dropouts. They're not critiquing the mix, kind of thing. Maybe loudness is all they're looking at, and some, metering. But
green light going up and down.
No, exactly. Maybe. So it's. I like to think you're the last gatekeeper on it, because the next stop is at home.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting that you just mentioned there the next step is at home, because somebody asked that question for the question period. Like literally right now, somebody sent that question. So we'll get to that soon. Move on, continue with what you're.
No, that's it. That's all I want to say. It's just that, often, you are the expert, and they're looking to you to be to the last call. Is that good enough to be on air? Yes, it is. Yeah. And
once you've done it long enough, though, I think, Bob, I'm going to point back to something that you said earlier, or I think Ross did too. Like, you're hired and they're sending you on a show to do something. Well, you've kind of earned their trust, because basically in the end, if you don't do that job and it's time to go to air and you don't know what you're doing, they're going to have nothing, and they won't know till you're not there for the open. Like we're left alone. You're left alone. You're given the responsibility to deal with this yourself. But that leads to producers requesting you and saying, I trust this. I know that Bob or Ross or myself or others will deal with this issue. My announcers will sound fine after. I'm not going to get complaints after. On and on. I'll meet the specs. I won't put the mics in the wrong spot where the players are upset, or the referee is upset that you put the microphone in the wrong spot. Happens, by the way. And all of the above. And on Olympics or other things, there's many other, we haven't discussed so much, but there's many protocols from federations where microphones can go, what they expect, et cetera. And you have to know all that.
And I think with that, Roberto, it's also in the Olympics. When you're at the venue, there are other people downstream of you that are quite concerned, that are audio engineers. Like when Doug has been in the QC room. I know this Olympics, he was in commentary. When there's three guys that sit in the QC room and they follow it, and he is an audio person, and they're giving you critique back. And they're making sure your mix is good. On a normal Leafs hockey game, there's nobody downstream from the audio room in the truck that's doing anything like that. And it's kind of fun at the Olympics for that, because you're talking to like a brother in arms, and he's going like, can you just do this, just tweak your mix here a little bit like that, and they're very good about saying it's not because of your mix, it's just that yours is not matching the other 25 guys, and you just need to adjust this because we want every venue to sound the same.
Exactly. Well, can we move on to the questions that our listeners have brought over? And some of them are super cool. People brought in excellent questions. So the first one is by Barry Zimmerman, and it's approximately what percentage of the events you work are indoor versus outdoor? Which do you prefer, and what are the main differences other than the weather?
I'd say 50-50, indoor, outdoor. It's very seasonal too. I mean, winter's, in the winter, you're doing a lot more indoor, obviously. Baseball, football, MLS, all that kind of stuff. In the summer is obviously outdoors. Outdoors is always my preference, other than the wind. I don't consider wind weather in that sense. The stadiums vary. Toronto FC, what's it called? BMO Field.
Yeah.
Can be very bad for wind, and that regardless of the weather, just because of proximity to the lake. Iberwin, doesn't have a lot of wind, just the way it's sort of nestled under the escarpment, and it's right in the city. So, but you don't get the reverberation, don't get the ceiling bounce and stuff like that, which is nice when you're outside.
I agree with Bob. I think it's 50-50. It depends what contracts you happen to have. If you're in the sports world, I think we've done all the summer ones with like baseball, golf, soccer, football. Then indoors is basketball, hockey, curling. It's a mixture too. You win on some and others. So you mentioned not weather, but weather is a big deal. And this is on other shows. I've done entertainment shows. New Year's Eve, I was in Saskatchewan. It was -45, and I had a singer who sang live at -45. So there's, you undo a cable and it's frozen, and you get it out of the truck and it's in a coil, it's frozen, you have to take it indoors, defrost it, put it out. I mean, there's so many different things that weather can be a big problem, and water's an enemy, water down all your patches, etc. It can be a problem indoors in a hockey rink when you're running lots of cables everywhere. If someone hasn't laid it correctly and they get somewhere where they're re-icing, etc., water can get into it, and you'll get the etc. And you're hundreds and hundreds of feet or thousands away for some stuff. That can be a problem. Or in the winter, I've done hockey outdoors, as Bob has. I think an unexpected problem was I did the outdoor game in Annapolis, where the Navy Stadium is. And the NHL does stuff like, hey, as we put our mics around, we were all done. And, or was in Regina. Anyway, it doesn't matter where it was. And then the people who dress around the rink to make it look beautiful, with all these little bits of foam and stuff to make it look like snow or tarp, well, they go around and they start stapling stuff. We started losing lines. And we lost lines because some of the staples went through some of our cables. Right? Well, that was a 200-foot run to here. And that was, and then our announcers for outdoor games are usually right beside the rink on the near side. I'm not sure if it was for you, Bob, this time around, but for me, the past few times, it was basically right there. That's kind of nice. But yeah, so the unexpected, I mean, what staples going through your cables. And
but we talked through the idiosyncrasies of that, so what used to always catch some A2s and is before we used PCCs, we often used lavaliers, Sony ECMs. And you had to be, the little things you had to teach people is that, you had to be really careful about the preamp section of the ECM, that it didn't touch anything metal on the hockey boards. because often they were bolted into the ground, and if they weren't grounded properly, or they were grounded, one of the others, but if the metal preamp touched one of the bolts holding the boards into the ground, you would get hum. So you'd have to put gaffer tape on the preamp so it didn't touch anything metal, because sometimes they would tape it to one of the stanchions, and if the metal touched the boards, and I know it's not related to weather, but that's when you were talking about that, it's just all the idiosyncrasy of some of the outdoors or the sports or the water. But yeah, the metal, any metal part on the boards is tough to deal with. The XLRs can't touch them.
Yes, that's the thing that's common for both indoor and outdoors. Actually, I think where you went is very relevant, because it's all the unforeseen things that can happen, because you're running stuff where people aren't expecting cables to be. You're not on a stage like on a concert where everybody knows where all the wires are going. You're going around ice. Fans are going to spill stuff all around you. Word I learned this best in my early years, first couple of times at the Memorial Auditorium, so early 90s. The Canadians would come in and the lines would go outside the pod and then in, etc. Well, the Habs won or something, and I'm going outside to go wrap my cables, and I see 100 Habs fans peeing against the wall all over our cables. So so I don't know, that might be, I'm outdoors, it's an indoor venue, but you have to deal with fans, people spilling beer all over your stuff.
Pulling the cables up at the Rogers Center dugouts is probably one of the worst things, because you watch how much baseball players spit, and the tobacco. There's less chewing tobacco. Oh, I know. There's less chewing tobacco than there once was in baseball, but it was always really bad. Like the stuff you'd pull up was just horrible. But the cable had to come out every game, or I guess every series. But
wow.
the things you don't know about sports TV, right? Is all the tobacco spitting.
Or CFL, I think, and then for Ross, tell me if you've done this, because you've been more on sidelines in the menu. For me, it was more in my early years. So I would do the dish, or we sometimes use an 816, Sennheiser 816 shotgun on the sidelines for CFL. And I remember the first time I ever did it. First of all, you don't want to I got hit by my very first game. I got hit by a player, and it hurt like hell the next day.
Yeah.
And when I did games in Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal, and Hamilton, of course, is where I'm from. There were days when they were throwing batteries at you. Raw meat was a kind of a promotion for a while, and there's like chunks of meat coming down at you. And the sideline was very shallow in the old field, so there's only like 10, a few feet between the foul line, the edge line, and the wall. And you have to watch out for photographers, cheerleaders. And that's not a bad thing, but they'll step on your cable or.
When we were on the sidelines of the CFL, they had pointed. I forget if they had one or two guys, but there was two people from the CFL that were just like, they were the buffers. So we would be filming or whatever, and they were just there to make sure that we didn't get smacked or whatever. Maybe they thought we were soft, but they definitely.
Good idea. I'm glad they did it.
With the audio system, if they hadn't done CFL before, I used to tell that we do a little bit of, we call it parab school if they hadn't done it. So you go to the game and you meet with the parabolic operators, which would be utilities or somebody new at the game, and you can point at this, point at that, don't do this. But I used to always say, be aware of your surroundings, because you need to leave yourself an out if the players are coming towards you. And the most common thing, because they would have headphones on, is you'd go to get, because they were very mobile being on foot, they would go and get ready for the next play. And then the golf cart would come in behind him, the camera on the cart, and come in behind him. And you said, just be conscious, because you may think that you have room behind you to step back, but the camera's now moved in behind you. And if this player comes towards you, you got nowhere to go. And just be aware of your surroundings and leave yourself, I always just say, leave yourself an out. So you have the ability to step aside when a player is coming towards you. Because everybody, I don't know how many people have seen that on YouTube, the guy that got smacked at that NFL game on the player introductions when he's running across. I don't even see his glasses ready to fly. And he's A2'd for me a couple of times. I've met him. So, but yeah, he was hurt pretty bad. So.
Oh.
Great tip for A2s there, for the A2s watching. Keep that tip. So the next question is, do they use instant replay device or PC-based system?
Well, Roberto or? There, you know what, the Digicart has been, I mean, nobody uses, well, I don't know anybody uses instant replay. I mean, pretty much use the Digicart system. I mean, some trucks have instant replay, but really the Digicart, which I guess is its big brother. I mean, it's still out there. I mean, they've discontinued manufacturing. I think the Digicart E was the last version that 360 Systems is made. I think they wanted to get out of the business, which is unfortunate because they revolutionized television with the Digicart when it came out in the 90s. Like it was, and then became, I don't know about outside North America, I assume, but in North America, it was the standard. I mean, we used cart machines until the Digicart came out.
I hated cart machines.
Oh,
Absolutely hated them. They wouldn't queue properly, and you know, the guy from Philadelphia, I won't mention his name, would show up with 50 of them, and you know, or I did WWF for a while. I'm sure you did, etc. They had cassettes, you know, to cue stuff for the winner and stuff. By the way, we all know who the winner was.
mm-hmm.
I had the list anyway. But at one point, I think I talked to Digicart because a lot of people were showing up with USB keys, etc. It was very difficult to handle. And then Shirali, my exec producer for Hockey Night, well, he would run a ton of music. I'd have 100 cuts of music, and I'd have cues. I'd like verse ins with vocals, without vocals, chorus ins with vocals, without vocals. And so I found I couldn't do that with the Digicart. So I went to Soundplant for a while, and then I ended up with Ableton pad, because I would get the color keys, and it was just quicker for me to edit and do stuff. But so I know a lot of guys are using some of their own little systems like QCart, or I think a lot of the ESPN guys for a while were using Sound App Q. They were using, no, that was a few years ago. They were using them on iPads, because ESPN has to run two different sets of music, one for live and one for the play it louder. Like the licensing doesn't work for when they replay their stuff, so they should record a second mix with different cuts of music. But yeah, there's all these different apps for 15, 20 bucks, etc. For me, Ableton was fine because I'd have 64 keys and I could scroll and I could get to where I needed to be.
What I was going to point out is what's interesting behind Roberto is that's a key cube. Is it called a key? But that's an Enco, right? It's over your left shoulder.
Left shoulder.
Is that an Enco or is that an Ableton keyboard?
That's my Ableton keyboard.
Oh, okay. It looks very much like what's popular is Enco out of Detroit, Michigan. Actually, I'm not sure the Detroit, but Enco, which is a radio system. They run. They've built a system for Bally Sports, which was previously known as Fox Sports, which is their DAD system. It works very well. It's a broadcast level server, playing back the music. I use Ovation. That's what I travel with, is a small Ovation system from Mergin. I'm a little concerned about using consumer on a broadcast show. It took me a while to decide what to buy. I've seen some cheaper systems out there, and Ableton is nice. It's that much higher of a standard. Much like merging technology, I just wanted something that, should it fail on air, at least I'm not saying, well, it was because I brought my own gear. Like the tough thing in the sports world is that the producer showing up with a USB stick with WAV files and said, here's the music. But nobody actually supplied any gear that can play music off a USB WAV file, and we're expected to deal with it. So you're either transferring it real time or whatever you're doing to a Digicart or whatever, but everybody's kind of traveling their own stuff a little bit more now, their own gear. I wanted something that, at least if it died, I could say, well, it's, this wasn't something I bought off eBay. I have actually, a broadcast level device, made by Merging, that the manufacturer will, at least if I have a problem with manufacturers, I can have a decent enough excuse to say, like, well, Merging doesn't know what happened, but, last thing I want is an email notification playing out on air, So.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, your mic's off, Roberto.
Well, I agree that's actually something I think I've caught myself with that. I use Dante Via. I also have Dante Sound Card because I have Pro Tools on my laptop as well. I do sometimes some sound effects and stuff. I do some sound design live. And but Dante Via allows you to control which app goes out, and I think that's a great idea. Ovation is tremendous. At CBC internally, we use Spot On. I think we were looking at one point at Ovation, but I think I think a lot of us favored it. I can't remember what the decision was, and that could change in the future. But Ovation is definitely really better. I did never really like the DAD system. I think some people did, but the biggest changer really was the Digicart when it came out. It was, unfortunately, we just couldn't reliably continue getting cuts from people, you know, on that. But you know, to be able to just hit play and it would reliably work, etc. That was.
It was a game changer, because for anybody who was using carts when the Digicart came out, like it just changed the job in the audio room. Like it was probably I'd say, other than digital mixing boards, it might have been in sports world one of the greatest developments in the last 30, 40 years in the room.
Yeah, for sure. I remember we wanted to get one. CH had carts, and we had a 2-track machine, which is even worse. Right? Can you imagine this queuing, you know, looking at it?
But every audio room in the truck had a 1/4 inch and cart machines, and you always had the 1/4 inch laced up as a backup.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I think the Digicart came out, I remember seeing it. I think Paul Patno was a TP at the time. He was telling me, "Oh, you got to look at this thing." And so we were supplying trucks for the Sabres, and Jay Willis was the mixer, I think, at the times, and still is occasionally. And I tried to buy the Digicart, and I couldn't get it. I can say this because the people who were at CH, and that place really doesn't exist anymore anyway. And Jim and I and Bob, we wanted a Digicart. So I went to Jay. I said, "You got to get this. You're going to be able to do this, this, and this." And they asked for it, and then it got in the truck, and we got our Digicarts. And they loved it. And then we used to make copies of Bernoulli drives, etc. But I think the last time that we were sending audio guys out, when Rogers came on board, I remember making Bernoulli discs for Rogers for the new Hockey Night music in like 2014 and 15. And we had a hard time buying Bernoullis or whatever the zip disc. Sorry, I was thinking euphonics.
They were using Bernoullis before.
Oh, even earlier, yes. But even a zip disc, you used to be able to buy 10 for, you know, $10 or something, and it was costing like $25 for one somewhere on Amazon. So, and then, you know.
All
Next
right.
question.
Yeah, we have another question. This one's very interesting to me because I've worked with video games before. And this question is, what are your thoughts on esports? Have you ever mixed them? Like, I suppose that it would be easier because you have, you're dealing with gameplay, so you're dealing with the audio coming out of the computer instead of, you know, all these mics, the PA system, and you'd only have the audience plus the audio coming out of the computer straight up. That's what I suppose it will be. But what are your experiences, if you have any, mixing esports?
I'm sorry, that garbled a little bit. I'm not sure what product you're talking about exactly.
Like esports, like electronic sports, like video games. Like there are championships now that happen in like arenas. People, you know, actually like an actual audience watching people play video games.
I have two. I'm not sure if you guys have dealt much with esports. I did an event in a very early event for Overwatch. The first time Overwatch had their league, and they were doing everything out of the old Johnny Carson studio in Burbank that they had bought, and they had completely revamped, and that's where Overwatch was doing all their competitions, which I think is like 5-on-5 in Overwatch. This might be a long answer because it's really quite interesting. But anyways, I worked on their first remote. They decided to actually leave the studio and go on remote. And we were in Dallas, and we were in about a 5,000 or 6,000 person hockey arena and did an Overwatch tournament with 6,000 fans. I'd never, you know, to me, it was just like, what's this esport thing? But it was amazing because the sound is quite good in those games, much like, you know, it made people who were surprised during the NHL bubble that we were using enhanced audio with the NHL 2020 or whatever it was. Like, oh, well, I've heard in Overwatch, like I've heard the product coming out of them, and it makes sense because it's all real time based on where the game is at. I thought what they did at Overwatch of that, because there was audience mics out, so there was real audience plus the audience and the sound effects that were happening within the game that were mixed together, which I thought made for an interesting experience. what I found most interesting about, and this is going off from audio, but more about esports, which I hadn't experienced before, but there's two elements. There's two production teams when you do esports, and there is a director that sits and directs the the actual competition, and he's directing. They have these. They don't call them viewers, but there's certain when you can be a player or you can be like almost like a viewer to the game, but within the game. And so those games can actually, you can have the perspective if you're first person, but you can be in a perspective in the room. They've set it up that is almost like a camera. That's almost like a drone. And there's a group that just create a version of the game that's suitable for viewing all the different participants. So we would watch that and we would add live audience reaction because that's what's on the big screen behind all the players and stuff like that. But it was interesting that was now this virtual playing field where, normally if we did a sporting event, there would be cameramen shooting. Well, they had guys on the gaming systems that were changing perspectives, and the sound was all related to that. And it was a very interesting experience. I thought it was really well done. I'm not a gamer per se, so I don't know a lot about it, but the coverage we did of it was something I'd never seen before, and I thought it was kind of neat.
I think we have a lot of friends that are gone to do these broadcasts. Apparently it is, as Bob was saying, it is huge business. Sometimes trucks will go for 2 or 3 months. Some of these mobiles, like the picture of like the audio room that you see behind me, will go somewhere in the Colorado or LA. A person who's left CBC, he does comms with them, Brett Mannion. And he's goes a few times a year. He goes to like the UAE or down to California, and he does it. And they have tons of money and develop money, and it's they just have huge numbers. It's a very part of their promotional product, and the whole idea and concept is developing. It's some people say it's surpassed pro sports already. I think depending on how you look at it, I think it will eventually.
Dole Productions does the NBA 2K, which is back on now, I guess, or whatever. And it's for them, it's a massive, and everybody's producing from home. Like a lot of the technical crews working from home, which was sort of a pandemic model, but they've actually carried on that sort of cloud-based. But that NBA 2K is a big property. I mean,
yeah. And a lot of that we haven't talked about is one of our roles is. See, if you're wondering what one of us would do in a dome truck on these kinds of things, we'll take feeds and move things everywhere. But I think is it fair, Bob, for us to say most of the work will shift towards doing comms. And not much of our discussion tonight is talked about comms, but comms is a really big part of what we do. And it's a variant. Like some places, some audio people don't do very many comms in some areas, but in sports we do, and local sports in the United States, they don't. I've had to help them many times, but network sports, like all the NBC or ESPN guys, they can do comms really well. So it's an uneven thing, but I want to point out that, so gaming engine and stuff like that, if we're in a truck and we're doing anything like that, I don't think we're going to do, I think our role would just shift more to, accommodating the production, which includes comms.
Interesting, yeah. We may at some point even do a specific event on comms. I think that it's such a big topic that I thought about talking about it in this meeting, but it will become like a 4-hour meeting if we did. So that'll be for the next one. And actually, it kind of relates to one of the questions here that was sent to us. Do you guys think that trucks are going to go away and engineers will be able to work from home, and how close are we from mixing from home?
I think even just looking at my buddy Doug McClement, in music world, he's got the truck, and he's saying that his truck gigs are even like a third of what they used to be in terms of people just saying bring the mobile pack instead of being a truck. There's less budget to bring out the giant mobile, right, for independent events. Now I think for broadcast, I don't know how they would be able to mitigate the necessity of needing a truck, because most, like especially in the States, when looking at like the ESPN trucks, they have the audio department is usually just stuck in the little corner in the back, like in a little separate room in the back. but they have everything in there. It's not just the audio, it's everything. So I think the facilities would have to have their own broadcast station or some studio built into it in order to not have a truck for the broadcast world. But I think for independent stuff, I think, yeah, you're seeing less and less of it because you can do everything with little devices now. Do you know?
It still comes down to, for me, latency. And I mean, yes, I mean, there's certain elements that have to be captured on site. I mean, the internet and connectivity is still going to be affected by distance and latency, and I don't know how we're going to get rid of some of that. And there's just some elements that some stuff has to be on site, like the preamps have to be on site. Well, you can remote control the preamps to a point. You've seen some job functions actually more than anything. You've seen job function move to home, but the gear is still on site. The replay operators working from home, but they're basically remote controlling a device that was brought to the stadium.
Exactly.
Audio is a tough one that way because of the latency, and you still sort of see that if that's the case, you'll still end up seeing a mixer on site and a mixer remote, and there's one audio engineer on site that is dealing with control and comms, let's say, on site, and then he may not be doing the mix, but he's definitely involved in it.
That's much the experience we had at the CBC, right, Roberto? Like where everything was Dante essentially. Like.
Yeah, for this Olympics, because of the pandemic, well, when the NHL wasn't going to go, we brought the last set of announcers, and all of our announcers were here. So we had 15 booths, all on a giant pandemic network. Bob, we used the Studio Technologies Dante version. So unlike some of the things and some blogs I've heard and read about, there's a lot of IP stuff happening in Canada. But we also we have RP1, so CalRec, we have 2 CalRec Apollos, for example, in our studios. And but we have 3 remote, basically remote DSP, and those are RP1s. The remote DSP has MADI cards, Dante cards, AES, analog over there. But everything appears on a console, or it also appears on a touchscreen. And so for Tokyo, we ran track and field and swimming remotely using the RP1 and opening and closing microphones and doing stuff. The DSP is over there. It has to be local. When Bob mentioned latency, I'm going to just jump around a little bit here. Our return time got better to Tokyo, but it's a 1.5 seconds. So the time over the dark fiber for a signal to get from here to Tokyo and back is 1.5 seconds. There's so many logistical problems, because if your announcers are here and they're calling the show there, but then Mariana and other people mix commentary, which returns back across the pond to OBS and is married with a 5.1 signal that comes back. There's a question about what are the play-by-play people calling on screen, and what is sync exactly. And so there's all sorts of issues for latency, clocking. There's new stuff coming along. I know a lot of people are solving clocking by using Dante GPS devices, and they're locking the GPSs, because then that's the same clock, and in different locations. But how that I go far deeper in some of the technical stuff, and that's probably yet another discussion. But in the end, sometimes you need a guy there. Like if I'm mixing music or something, there's if you're not there, then you've removed the relationship part.
Yeah.
So somebody has to be there to give the people there the confidence. And
at least state twos need to be there. At least state twos, I mean, obviously need to be there.
It depends what's happening there.
I sometimes refer to it as even when you're on site and with audio systems on site, you're in the truck. I mean, you can't leave the truck. You can't leave the audio control room. So I often refer to the A2s as you're my hands and feet. I can't go out to move a microphone, but together we can. I'm here. You're the hands and feet. I don't know what you're seeing. Can you move the microphone 3 feet to the left? I need to trust you and believe you that you can move it 3 feet to the left, or you're going to move it somewhere decent that I'll be happy with. But it's not a hierarchical type of relationship. It's very much you're my hands and feet out there. And I think whether, as you're saying, Roberto, if it's remote, so let's say you are in Toronto, you need somebody in Tokyo to put eyeballs on something, or are you hearing that in the room? Is that an acoustical sound or is it an electrical sound I'm hearing? And you know, and you need that person, that human there.
It's the next argument. As I'll try to give you an example. There's Australia, Aussie Rules Football, the ATV or ABC in Australia. They have central studio, and all the Aussie Rules, they've wired all the stadiums. I think some German soccer broadcasters done the same thing, and everything is what's called a REMI. And it's a loose, misused word, and but basically there are no traditional trucks on location. The camera guys are there, the A2's there putting out stuff, and there's some sort of like transmission unit, like a mini truck, and it's all being mixed by the same people in the studio. So they've done that. I think in California, a lot of college sports is being done by that way. I can't remember the outfit, but we've done a fair amount of research on this. There's a person who did a lot of development for this named Henry Rousseau from ESPN. Met him during the Pan Ams. They're trying to save a lot of money, because if ESPN goes somewhere, they have 100 ADs, like assist, and production people, etc. Canadians, we don't really send as many people somewhere, and then they have a lot of properties like WNBA or college stuff, etc. And in areas which are harder to get to, and you're putting up people in hotels. So on major properties, it's still the trucks. And the third example, very quickly, was that I can't remember which act it was, but on the Grammys they tried to do this. They did it with dark fiber across the street to a studio. I can't remember what act. And was it for Beyonce's thing? I think Beyonce's thing was mixed, but not in the truck in the venue. It was mixed in a studio, in someone's studio in Los Angeles. And we can totally do that. We're trying that for more and more stuff here. We're running something called Dante Studio. We're experimenting, runs 64 channels over a central CPU. And we're experimenting with that. We're trying to traveling audio for some stuff.
Excellent. So the very last question of the night is Anthony, one of our execs, has a question. And it is, with all the multi-channel experiences and player mics, how far away do you think we are from consumers mixing it from their own point of view at home or on an app?
It's probably there now today if somebody wanted to sponsor it. I mean, with the 5G stuff that, that you can see the, I don't know what's properties. I know the Montreal Canadiens is one where you can watch on your phone and watch any camera you want. I imagine, I know when we do those, some of those have been done, we do send a lot of different audios to them, but I think, the individual mics will be interesting because somebody's still going to need to turn them on and off. Like with the player mics, anything we do with player mics has to be approved by the league before it gets on air even live. Like we're not allowed to use the mics live. But I would think so. I mean, like I said, it might already kind of be there with the 5G stuff. You're just starting to see emerge but it's a selling point. If you buy a Bell, you can only get that Bell 5G Montreal Canadiens on a Bell phone. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's not it's a selling feature. I think the same thing with Rogers. I'm not sure what property Rogers is doing it with. Maybe it might be baseball. I don't know, but
I would wonder. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, if there's money to be made, somebody's going to do it. So
I would wonder what and not to be cynical, but I wonder what the desire would be. Like I would imagine that once an audience member sort of realized how much work it actually is to do this job, they probably would be like, all right, that's pretty good for 5 minutes. Yeah, okay, let's go back to the broadcast. Like, I think it would just be a reality check more than anything. So I wonder what the desire would be.
I agree with you too, Ross. I think it might be a novelty. Then I think it would lose its appeal after a period of time, unless there's something specific. Unless you have a player that you were in love with and then that you just wanted to watch the camera and listen to his microphone for the whole game. That'd be about the only time I'd think that somebody would stick with it.
It's pretty stalker, right?
Yeah. Well, that would come across at the last finals I was at. I was invited to a discussion with Tim Dunn is the main mixer for NBC, and he had someone from the NHL there, and they talked about player tracking. And he said, what can we do with this for audio? He said, this is open discussion. And he talked about player tracking, like, you know, the mics, et cetera. But the problem is the swearing. Will the player want to do that? And if you're not understanding the difficulty there, it's kind of like, okay, you're Metallica and you're on the Grammys. Would you allow the person at home to track individual mics, listen to Kirk's microphone by himself? Well, actually, if it was working. And
0%.
yeah, and that might be, it's an interesting thing, but the NHL was looking at some ideas of tracking of, if that player went around, could we trigger microphones around the ice at least to follow that player? And I thought, wow, that's kind of, how would you do that? It's all fairness, but maybe first they got to figure out how people can listen consistently to 5.1 properly in their rooms before they try to listen to a signal that they can't properly monitor. It would be really cool. Like, I agree. I think that's really fantastic.
The interesting thing too would be with that is that now if they're doing those selection, how much of the product is being transported to them? So is that selection happening locally, or is that now a unique transmission? You know, because now you get into the bandwidth. So if there's 25 mixes available, are those 25 mixes now, where are they available? At what point are they being selected? And you know, then you can the bandwidth issues, like, well, if you want all 25 mixes available on the phone, or, you know, I'm trying to think of some of the limitations. You know, they're the IT people, that's way too much bandwidth for audio. You can't have that much.
Yeah, but then at the same time, let's go back to hockey. I remember the last game I did at MSG, just before the pandemic. A bunch of guys were down that day. They said, "Oh, we're hearing that, you know, Madison Square Garden is MSG network for those who aren't full sports. It's the same thing. They were told that they're probably going to Remy their home show. So meaning that they won't show up at the arena every day. They'll be in a studio somewhere. And this has been tried before. It's nothing new, really. And they're all upset. So you want to kind of reduce everything on one end, but then you might want to add a complexity that you may not want to pay for it, because really our day is pretty busy. So the more mixes you make us create, sometimes with inconsistent equipment from, like, you know, how often, Bob, have you been told I'm going to go to Phoenix, I'm going to be in this mobile video group truck, and you prepare for it and that truck doesn't show up, or it's 2 hours late. And the console's different, the intercom is half the size, the game time hasn't been changed, and how do you meet all the specs, right? Like at CBC, yeah, we have Calrec Apollos, for those who don't know, it's 1100 input console, and with a zillion outputs in a studio, and some dome trucks have that, and lots of incredible American trucks have that, you know, Game Creek, Amazon, and others. But that truck is not necessarily there all the time. So are their production going to pay for a consistent facility to do something that complex every game? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Unless it's sponsored. And it comes back to the sponsor thing.
Exactly.
I was going to say, yeah, when you talk about the mixes now, I mean, since the pandemic, you know, a standard hockey game now is a day from hell. Like just doing a home hockey game, it's a little better now that some of the visiting teams are traveling. But I mean, it's you go in, if you're the only truck, you're going in at 9 a.m. for a 7 o'clock game. So you've worked 10 hours without a break, and I mean literally without a break. There's no chance to eat. There's no chance to get out of the truck, and it's 10 hours straight setup and patching in a truck nonstop for 10 hours. Then the game starts. And the most of the, when you probably talk to the guys, Roberto, I mean, the day is just crazy now. And you're doing probably, I'm doing for a show like that, I'm doing 2 5.1s, probably 4 stereos at least. Yes. So there's 6 main mixes being done in the truck simultaneously, 2 for the NHL, 2 for the visiting team, 2 for the home team, plus what you're feeding radio, plus what you're feeding house. And then there's comms on top of that in your day, and comms to all those locations, so that the director in Nashville wants to be able to talk to his 3 cameras that are passing through your room, and the headset to be for the player on the bench to be interviewed is going through your console. So you're actually doing 3 shows in one now, and it's the day is it's exhausting. I haven't worked that hard in a day, and you literally patch for 10 hours.
Yeah.
And the lineup is like 45 minutes to get toned down all those signals to the right places that everybody's happy, and you've got to identify every channel, and it's like a 45-minute to an hour lineup before 7 p.m.
It's horrible. It affects, and what no one's looking at is the production. Like last Olympics, and I had to go into post for a couple of months this year. So I remember the last game I did last spring was the Canadians game at NBC. So Canadians, French, all right. So, but there's no truck there. So it was a separate booth for French, their transmission, and they wanted a bunch of different stuff, and NBC wanted things, same camera, different audio. So I think they ran out of frame syncs. And not everything was working. Mark Scott was a TP. He'll tell you we had a 2-hour transmission check. So I completely hear you. I was hoping it would get better this year, but now your day is focused on getting all this stuff out, but it's not focused on making your show necessarily better. So you're straining the home show. So that's kind of what it's comes to.
Well, Roberta, where I would look around, and maybe it's not that I'm trying to end this, Mariana, but as the person was talking about, about more remote work and stuff. That's where I think the position of A1 and A2s at these live sporting events, it's going to be a long, long time before we're no longer required on site, because you can't do that level of technical integration remotely. Like that is all hands-on doing a hockey game, and that's not just unique to hockey. I mean, baseball has done this world feed kind of method as well, like with the Jays and stuff like that. And that's, you can't do that remotely, that much head end stuff that's happening on site. And I don't think the job's going away for a long time because of that. Some people may think there's savings that could be done because you can mix from home. But, you look at my day, it's 10 hours of patching. The easiest part of the day is the 3 hours I sit down at the desk and mix. Because now, like if I don't have it, I'm not getting it, and now I can just sit back and relax and mix, and it's the easiest part of the day. I could do that remotely. I could, bring in one of the audio systems to do it. But that 10 hours of troubleshooting and patching is where all the expertise is nowadays, especially and specifically with live sports, because that's your true expertise. And I think, Roberto, even going back further to something you said earlier, is that there's that trust. You're on, often on the live sports, especially at the national level. You're there because they believe you can do it, and they believe that they'll know you'll get it done, and you'll complete the job. And if you're remote, that's just not going to happen. I would love it. So I could do the 10 hours of setup, and somebody could mix it at home, and I'll just sit down for 3 hours and watch the game in the truck.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's about it for today. We don't have any other questions that I've seen so far. So I'd like to thank you all so very much for taking the time to be here and to spend 2 hours of your time talking about your experiences and inspiring the next generation of engineers to potentially follow the same path as you. Thank you very much, and I would also like to thank, on behalf of the AES, our amazing sponsors, Solotech, Gear Audio, Sonotechnique, Bell Media, YSL Pro, Electrosonics Canada, BRTB, Global USS, Adamson, Leo Consoles, avshop.ca, Q5X, and our supporters, Ryerson University, now called Toronto Metropolitan University, Professional Sound, Sheridan, and of course, our overall AES International Organization. So thank you very much to all of you, and enjoy your amazing evening, guys.
Nice to meet you guys out there.
Nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet you as well.
I'm coming for the playoffs. Okay, I'll meet you. You're gonna let me in the back, right? Of the Rogers Center or the Scotiabank?
No. It'll be in Florida.
Fine. I'll come anyway. It's fine. Even better.
All right.
I'm serious, though. I'm coming.
Have a good night.
Bye. Good night.